Welcome. I'm Kinetic Symphony. I hunt down and report on mysterious and weird, true stories, from glitches to the paranormal. This is my channel's monthly compendium for the month of December 2021. I hope everyone has a lovely Christmas and Happy New Year's. Here's to 2022. Let's make it a good one. Let me know what your New Year's resolution is gonna be. Case file number 418, written by Little Double Cup. I think this is me from the future. So this Friday, I was at university as usual. I go to a university in a German city with a population of 150,000. Some information about me. My name is a not very frequent name. I'm 22 and had already studied something different before, but didn't really like it, so I decided to study something else, which I have just started this October. I'm also from a Balkan country. So this Friday, I sat in my last lecture for the day next to my friend. Then a guy walks in that looks scarily similar to me, like every facial feature was the same, except that he had a beard and curly hair. My hair is straight and I can't grow a beard. Even my friend sitting to my right said that he looked exactly like me. Then this guy comes up to sit next to me. Straight away, he introduces himself and has the same name as me too, which once again is a not too frequent name in Germany. I look at him funny at this point, a bit weirded out, but he seems unfazed. He then asks how old I am. I tell him 22. He says he's 24. He asks whether I'm new at the university. I say that I've just started this major, but I've done something before at the same university. He says the same, and says that before his current major, he used to study the exact same thing as me, which weirded me out even more. Then, after some small talk initiated by him, because I was just overwhelmed, he told me he was on holiday in Jordan, a country in the Middle East. Here's the crazy part. One of my best friends is partially Jordanian, and we have been talking about flying to Jordan for a holiday just a couple weeks earlier. This was all during class, and then after class, as we were getting ready to leave, he had his phone on the desk in front of him. His phone starts ringing and displays the same name as my current girlfriend. And he apologizes and tells us that he has to hurry because he has to drive his girlfriend to the train station. So I am assuming that his girlfriend has the same name as mine. The girlfriend's name is a pretty frequent one, so that one could be chalked up to coincidence, but among so many at this point. After class, my friend jokingly said that this guy is me from the future, which I laughed off, but honestly, who knows? These coincidences and the almost 100% similar looks are crazy to me. Also, this guy supposedly did the same major as me for 3 years at the same university before, and is now once again doing the same major, and this is the first time that I saw him. Case notes, file number 418. So I will say here, I think a lot of people will attribute this to a doppelganger, which makes some sense, right? You have the obvious, he looks like you, he sounds like you, all that, but he's not exactly the same. But really the giveaway for me is that in every doppelganger story I've read so far, the person who is being impersonated by the doppelganger always feels extremely unsettled. And you didn't describe that at all, nor did anyone else in the class. It's almost like a true doppelganger has some sort of vibe or energy or aura around them that affects other people in a way where they can feel something isn't right. So I don't know if it's you from the future, or just a incredibly unlikely coincidence. But whatever it is, I'm not getting a doppelganger vibe, which in a way is a good thing. The reality must be even more interesting. Case file number 419, written by Adrian's Casserole. I dreamed who my future husband was going to be. I haven't been too open about this, but 10 years ago, I asked the universe for a dream about how I would meet my future spouse. That night, I dreamed that my favorite singer, my biggest crush at the time, was standing on a stage with blue lights all around him, in a towel. He picked up the microphone and said, "I'm not ready yet, but I will be." He then came down off the stage and showed me his iPhone. I thought it was interesting that it was white, because I hadn't seen a white iPhone before. I wrote down the dream in my journal, despite how random it was. I was Christian at the time, not anymore, just spiritual. And that summer I went to a new church I hadn't been to before. I was watching the stage during baptism. This very attractive man was getting baptized, and there were blue lights all around him, and he had a towel. It was almost the exact same scene from my dream. It freaked me right out. I stalked him a bit afterwards in the lobby, and he pulled out a bright white iPhone and started texting someone. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if he was single or taken or anything about him other than he was exactly my type and looked a lot like my singer crush as well. I kept going to the church and met him a few weeks later. We exchanged a few words, and later that day, he friended me on Facebook and messaged me his number and said although he didn't know me, he wanted to see if I wanted to go on a date. We've been married for about 8 years now, and I consider him my soulmate. I always wondered how exactly that happened. It was a little too specific to just be a coincidence of the mind. But if it was just a coincidence, it was a pretty interesting one, you gotta admit. Bonus file, written by Franho Tahi, A Deafening Flute of Silence. So, this happened yesterday, and I am a bit mystified to be honest. So the two of us were descending downhill from an old fortress, and just as the sun came down behind the mountain, everything went completely and utterly silent. 1 minute, the birds were singing and chirping like crazy, and the next, dead silence. Like someone flipped a switch, exactly like that. You could only hear the wind rustling the dead and falling leaves. It took us a few moments to really notice the silence before it became really loud and noticeable and deafening. So we kinda looked at each other and stopped to listen for a bit. After a while, something that sounded like a flute could be heard coming from further downhill. Every minute or so we'd hear it, 5 to 6 second intervals, nothing complex. It lasted maybe 10 minutes and then suddenly stopped. After a while, we could again hear birds, bugs, small animals, even cars in the distance. But during those minutes, everything went deadly silent, and the nearest wolves, bears, etc. are nowhere near this area. And then there was the odd music in the silence. So yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. Case file number 420, written by Nick 1000. An elevator to a dimension of parking garages. Never thought I'd experience something like this, but here I am. I currently work from home and had a break-in between clients. I decided to do laundry so I wouldn't have to worry about it later this week. To preface, my apartment is set up where the second floor is the main floor, mailboxes, lobby, office, and the first floor is the basement and where the laundry room is. All parking is outside and floors range from 1 to 6. When it was time to move my laundry to the dryer, I picked up my keys and some dryer sheets and went to the elevator to go to the first floor. I would have normally taken the stairwell since I'm on the second floor, but I also wanted to check my mail since I hadn't checked it yesterday. I hit 1 on the elevator and almost stepped out when the doors opened up. But it didn't open to the first floor hallway. It opened to a parking garage. I'm confused because I know the first floor is all apartments, laundry, and gym. I've lived here for over 2 years. I wish at that moment I could say that I stepped out and explored. I started to feel so freaked out because I know this apartment like the back of my hand, and I know we don't have a parking garage nor a floor beneath the first floor that I could have accidentally gone to. I pressed 1 again and the doors closed, but the elevator didn't move and the doors stayed closed for a few seconds. Then they reopened. I was on the first floor where I was supposed to be. Part of me wished I had taken my phone with me, but honestly, I think I was so freaked out and confused at that moment that even if I had, I would have been so focused on getting out anyways. And I know it's silly to be freaked out over a parking garage, but it feels so eerie because I know that we don't have one, nor do we have plans to have one. Our apartment manager would have shared it with us. I just came back from the apartment office. The only parking there is the parking lot surrounding the office and street parking. There never has been a parking garage. The only thing that goes beyond the first floor is the boiler room, and the first floor that has a set of stairs going down, but it's just one room. And yeah, that conversation was really damn awkward to have. Someone said it was peculiar that I don't have a phone. I don't carry my phone with me if I'm just going to pick up mail or do laundry, because I don't need it, nor am I attached to it. Case notes, file number 421. Okay, so here we have another elevator story. Honestly, they're fascinating. I don't know if it's because someone becomes enclosed in their own little bubble, and we know through quantum effects that if a particle isn't being interacted with, then weird things can happen. You have quantum tunneling, you can even have quantum overlapping, although an elevator isn't perfectly enclosed, mind you, because there's still lights, I'm presuming. There's still things affecting you. So I don't know if it's related to that at all, just speculation. What I do know is that there are so many glitches revolving around elevators that something is going on there, even if I don't have the answer as to why or how. In your case, what interests me most is actually that, as you say, the elevator doors close, but the floor doesn't change, and you'd know if it did because you feel it. You can't be on an elevator and not feel when it's moving. Either going down or up, especially up, you feel that elevator pressing on you. I mean, that's the only way you can move mass. You have to change it with energy, and you definitely feel that resistance as you're going up. Matter doesn't want to move, so when it is being moved, you know. And if you didn't feel that, well, honestly, that's just incredibly baffling. You see a parking garage that's not even supposed to be there, then the doors close, and then they open again a few seconds later without the elevator moving, which you can't fake that movement. You would feel it, even if a number changed, like in a prank. Those are nonsense. You cannot fake the sensation. And then it's just your normal floor as you expected. That's awesome. I guess perhaps another timeline that you just briefly saw. I kinda want something like that to happen to me. That's cool. Because it doesn't seem too unsettling. It just seems fascinating, intriguing, but not terrifying. At least I hope you're not terrified. Case file number 421, written by Angry Axe Only. Shifting realities as easily as turning a page in a book. I moved recently, and while packing my belongings, I went through a box of old stuff that hadn't been opened in probably 15 years. One of the items inside this box was an old book that I've read a dozen times when I was younger. Let me tell you about this book. When I was in 8th grade, 1998 to 1999, school year, our teacher assigned us this book to read. Each of us were given a 3-ring binder filled with the photocopies of each page of the book, rather than the book itself. Being the little nerd I was, I asked why we were given copies like this, and wasn't it against copyright laws? The teacher said she had permission to do this, and she had contracted the publisher, and the book was out of print. After we were done reading it, we had to turn in the 3-ring binders so that the teacher could use them again the following school year. I loved that book. I was borderline obsessed with that book. I talked about it non-stop. I wanted to read it again and again, but couldn't since I had to give it back to the teacher. We had just gotten dial-up internet, and we had a home computer and a printer that both my mom and I were learning how to use. Back in the early days of the internet, everyone seemed to be against buying things online. You remember that? I remember hearing a lot about how dangerous it would be to type in your credit card information because it could easily be stolen by hackers on the internet. So one day, when I found a printed out receipt for an online purchase my mom had made, it obviously caught my attention. I was rifling through the stack of my parents' documents like mail and bills and stuff like that when I found the receipt. I was a curious, annoying, nerdy kid who did things like this all the time. My mom had found my special book on the internet and ordered it for me for Christmas. She bought it off a website that was just starting to become well known at the time, mainly for books as I recall, a little place called Amazon.com. I remember thinking to myself how the name reminded me of the wild, dangerous Amazon rainforest, and how wildly dangerous it was to put your credit card information out there on the internet. Nevertheless, I was so excited that I would have my own copy of my favorite book, finally. I'm not sure if this was Christmas 98 or Christmas 99. But sure enough, it was under the tree and it was my favorite present that year. I read it cover to cover over and over for a couple of years. Finally, when I had my fill, I put it on my bookshelf with my other books, where it stayed until I packed my things and moved out of my parents' house. At some point, while it was on the bookshelf, my mom put that receipt folded up inside the book, and I noticed this before I packed it into the moving box. It stayed in that box on a shelf in the basement for all these years. Fast forward to present time. I'm packing and moving my belongings. I open the box, find the book, thought about the receipt. I wanted to show it to my boyfriend to make a joke about how my boomer mom used Amazon before it was even cool. So I open up the book, pull out the folded receipt, open it up to look at it, but it's not from Amazon. It's from barnesandnobles.com. Reality shifted right? That's the only explanation. I have such clear, specific memories of this receipt being from Amazon. I just don't even know what's real anymore. Case file number 422, written by Desperate Ad, 1071. When the universe decides to screw up your student art project. 10 days ago, I went shopping for some classroom supplies, including patterned craft paper for my students' art projects. I'd look online and decided to go to a Walmart out of town, which had everything I needed. When I got to the store, I found the paper I wanted, but was struck by another pad of paper made by the same company. The patterns were gorgeous, and I'd never seen them before. I figured they weren't sold at my local Walmart. After comparing the two, I decided to buy the paper I'd just discovered rather than the pad I'd originally planned on. I also bought a rectangular wooden crate and decided to use it in place of bags at self-checkout. When I checked out, I put the paper in last, but couldn't fit it against the side of the crate unless I curved the bottom. The crate had triangular reinforcements in the corners, which reduced the interior space on the sides. I didn't want to bend my pretty paper, so I took my other items out and carefully repacked the crate with the paper in the middle. My memories of this are very clear and critically important. When I got home, I left the crate in my trunk until Monday morning, when I brought it into my classroom and began my usual activities. At some point, I realized I didn't have the pad of paper, but I wasn't alarmed. I didn't need it until later in the week and figured it had somehow fallen out of my trunk. But the paper was not in my trunk or anywhere else in the car. Did I bring it in the house and forget that I did? That seemed like the only explanation. I looked around my house that night, no sign of the paper. I was baffled, but convinced I must have put it somewhere and would find it eventually. For art that week, I changed my plans and used what I had on hand. 1 week later, I'd rechecked the car and house several times and the paper was still missing. I still thought I'd misplaced it and was annoyed with myself because I wanted to use the paper in a project. I decided to buy it again. That's when things got really weird. I looked online to see if Walmart had the paper in stock. I'd bought the only one left on the shelf, but couldn't find those patterns anywhere. I searched other stores, searched paper made by other companies, and even looked on Etsy for older stuff. No luck. Then the final blow. I pulled out my receipt, hoping to find a product number. There is no record of my buying any paper. I am hyper-conscientious when using self-checkout, and I wouldn't pack an item until I heard the scanner beep. I'm always afraid I'll be accused of shoplifting, and mindful of the fact that the cameras are recording. In summary, I bought a pad of paper which I now can't find anywhere on the internet. The paper disappeared from the crate I'd carefully packed it in, and the purchase isn't listed on my receipt. This bothered me so much that I measured the crate's interior to see if I was consistent with my recollections. It was. The pad of paper was 12 inches square. The middle of the crate is 13 inches wide, but the sides are only 11 inches wide due to the corner reinforcements. I couldn't fit the pad on the side without carving it, but could easily fit it in the middle, just as I remembered. I'm stumped. Case file number 423, written by Desperate Ad, 1071. When the universe says Reparo on your necklace. Some people have suggested that glitches are happening more often. That's been true in my life. In the last 4 to 5 months, I've had 3 baffling glitches. Here's the latest. A few years ago, I bought a necklace in New Orleans. It has an elaborate pendant and beads intertwined in a delicate chain. Early last year, the chain broke in the middle and I couldn't fix it. I was annoyed because I'd only worn it about 10 times and it wasn't cheap. I boxed up the necklace and put it in the back of a long, narrow closet, planning to take it to the jeweler someday. Then the event that shall not be named hit, and I forgot about it. Recently I thought I'd like to wear the necklace and decided to have it fixed. I dug it out from the back of the closet and it wasn't broken. The piece was perfectly intact, as though nothing ever happened. This is mystifying. No one goes in that closet but me. My husband is disabled and can't even open the door, and we've had few visitors over since the world event started. I'm also embarrassed to admit that the closet is a mess. There's no way someone snuck in, searched through the closet, found the necklace, took it to the jeweler for repair, during the event no less, and secretly returned it to the closet. Besides, why would anyone do that, even if they could somehow pull it off? I never mentioned the broken necklace to anyone and have no explanation for what happened. Case notes, file number 423. Right, so we have crossover events where people transition between parallel universes, then we have disappearing object phenomena where people lose items and then usually they come back but not always, although all these objects and people, notable to say, are still bound to Earth's gravity, so whatever they're doing, they're still here in a sense, so that would explain why Earth is still relevant in the picture. Even though we can't see them. It's like they phase out of the electromagnetic spectrum, kind of like neutrinos can just pass through everything, but they are still affected by gravity. It's just that they're moving so fast, it's not really relevant at the scale of Earth, so they just zip right through. And then for your necklace, now we have a new one, something just being repaired, mystifyingly. Are we just going to call this repairing object phenomena? I wonder, this isn't as frequent, but I have read a couple stories about this. Objects that were destroyed, or mangled, or even completely broken, suddenly reassembling themselves. Never inside, of course, it happens off-screen, but it does seem to happen, and that's pretty damn cool. Perhaps we have leprechauns that are coming in the middle of the night to repair items that have great sentimental value to us. Well, maybe not leprechauns, but something did. Case file number 424, written by a scrummer, taking VR gaming to an astral level. 3 nights ago, I was in my daughter's 19 room, and she went downstairs to get a snack. When she was downstairs, I heard her say, "Where are you hiding?" So I asked who she was talking to. She said her brother, 17. Her brother was dead asleep in his room, so I said, "No, he's asleep in his room." After a pause, she ran upstairs, freaked out. She had me look in his room and verify he was there, after which she told me she had seen her brother in the hallway just a few minutes ago, and she followed him down the stairs. When she got to the bottom, he was gone. This was very weird, but it was late at night, and honestly, I thought she believed it happened, but it didn't actually happen. Well, then comes tonight. I'm in the downstairs bathroom. Don't judge me, it's Thanksgiving Eve. And I hear my son come down the stairs, walk down the hall, stand outside the door, and I see a shadow, and say, "Hey, Ma." So I say, "What's up, bro?" No response. So I say, "Yeah, Vin?" I hear him walk up the stairs, so I yell, "Broheim." Nothing. So I called for him to find out what he wanted. He's utterly confused, in his VR game with other people that confirm he's been on call. I'm not sure what's happening, but I'm a tad freaked out and have no idea what the hell is going on. Thoughts? Case notes, file number 424. Okay, so we have 2 witnesses in this glitch, both the friends of your son who were on call with him, and the fact that this happened to your daughter as well. Clearly your son has some sort of ability to project himself astrally without noticing. One thing I've always wondered about that ability is if it drains one's spirit. I mean, you are splitting yourself up at least temporarily. It surprises me, but of the stories I've read, it does seem like it places no actual toll on the person doing it. Even to the point where they can be doing it without even knowing they are. They could be playing a game like in this instance, though typically it does seem like it happens to people when they're sleeping more. I don't think it's an energy issue. I think something happens in our minds that makes us more amenable to doing it. For me, this makes me wonder how many times we've managed to project our own soul around the world without even knowing we did. How many glitches we might be responsible for in the minds of others, and we don't even know at all. Case file number 425, written by Keeping Thing Sieve. 3-foot gray man invades bedroom. Well, okay, let's just say it. He's an alien. I had this experience about 2 years ago. Some may argue that this experience was sleep paralysis, but I strongly disagree. It was very real. I was able to move and everything during this strange encounter. Normally, the experiences I've had in this house have been of the ghostly variety, nothing majorly noteworthy, but if there is interest, I can make a separate post for that as well. This was definitely not that. It started with me waking up in the middle of the night to my pet rats squeaking. I assumed, of course, that they were playing and one got upset at the other, so I sat up. I turned to my right to investigate their cage, which is close to my bed, only to see something I've never expected. It was a creature that I've seen and heard of from others, but never thought I'd ever see one myself. It was about 3 feet tall, based on my rat's cage that it stood next to, which was about 6 feet tall. It had a large bulbous head, dark gray skin, and big eyes. I knew that it was gray quite quickly. His skin seemed so smooth, with no flaw in its flesh at all. It even had a slight pearlescence to it that shined in the moonlight that peeked through my blinds. His eyes did not have a pupil, at least not that I could tell. They were also gray, yet I think there was a tinge of green. There were these strange squiggles and specks in the eyes, almost reminding me of space itself. Then nothing happened, or rather I woke up the next morning. I am almost certain he made me go back to sleep. I'm not sure who he was interested in, me or my rats. They were just fine when I checked in on them the next morning. No one was missing, and I did not feel different myself. I know this is a quick story, but like I said, not much did happen. I did not feel like I was in danger, but I still wonder what that was about in general. Sometimes I wonder if creatures like that just know you are interested in them. I think that may have been why I saw one. Thanks for listening. This has been etched in my brain for a while now. Case file number 426, written by Luna Lotus 90. When a kitchen item goes on a 3-day vacation. My bestie and I lived together in a very small apartment while in college. The kitchen only had one cabinet for our large stuff like my wok, a food processor, and a large pitcher. Everything in that cabinet wouldn't fit anywhere else in the kitchen, so both me and my bestie are extremely antisocial and introverted. So despite that we had lived there for 2 years, neither of us had made any real friends. We didn't have people over, we didn't have parties, and we didn't have people to borrow stuff from us. Anyways, one day, my bestie went to make Kool-Aid, and the pitcher was gone. He looked in the fridge wondering if I had already made some, and nope. We tore the kitchen apart looking for the pitcher, and with our minimalist bedrooms and living room, there was no doubt we wouldn't find it in there, but we looked all over the apartment anyways. It was just inexplicably gone. We tried to come up with theories of where it could have gone. He started thinking I threw it away because I tend to toss useless crap, but I was like, no, we use it all the time, and I'd remember doing that. So I started to think maybe maintenance stole it, but this was during the event that shall not be named, and we were home 24/7 doing online classes, and neither of us worked. We were just baffled. 2 days went by, and then we decided to make some beef and broccoli. My bestie opens up the cabinet to grab the wok, and the freaking pitcher is sitting in the damn cabinet like it didn't just go on a 3-day weekend. We were like, yo, what the hell? What was crazy was that it was placed exactly how I recall leaving it the last time I saw it, and put it in there. Upside down, lid off to the side, tilted against the food processor. I've already been convinced we live in a simulation prior to this, but that was the experience that finally brought my bestie on board, too. Case file number 427, written by Reenstar. I didn't know they used cash in the afterlife. My grandma, whom I was very, very close to, passed away in 2014. Every birthday of mine she was alive for, she would have my mom buy her a greeting card and she would put $100 in to give to me. It was always in increments of 20s, since that's what the ATM gives you at the bank. I keep all of her cards, among a number of other keepsakes, in a box, and periodically go through them and reread her cute messages. I have about 20 to 22 cards from her, and it's not a lot to read, so I normally read them all when I miss her. One that always sticks out to me is one from my teen years, where the card itself must have come with a number of stickers for you to fill in the front of the card, which was Happy XX Birthday on it. Grandma couldn't read English and left it blank, so I always thought it was a cute mistake. I got married in 2016 and naturally missed her immensely and was sad that she wasn't able to be there. Shortly after the wedding, my husband suggested I read her cards again because I was missing her. As I was going through the cards, the one with the blank age came up. I opened to read it. Mind you, I have opened and read this card many, many times, and out fell $20. Let me preface this by saying, my keepsake box has a lock on it. I have the key on my keychain at all times. Moreover, the box is sort of a hiding spot at my parents' house. I don't even think they know it exists. I strongly believe that it was impossible for someone else to have put $20 in there. Also, there's no reason that I wouldn't have taken the money out if I knew it was there. And I would have, since I recognize and have read this card countless times. It feels like it was put there by my grandma because she knows how much I miss and need her, and how sad I was that she couldn't attend my wedding. It felt like a little wedding gift from her. It makes sense, since she never had any increment other than $20 bills. Bonus file written by Mountain Gold, 4734. Our dearly departed baby son, the Astronaut. I'd like to share this experience with others because it's been a beautiful and perplexing thing for us. This is the kind of story I had previously heard about, but when it happens to you, it really is quite amazing. In April 2020, my partner and I sadly lost a son at 17 weeks gestation. I had an infection in my uterus which was undetected, and after several days in hospital with some worrying symptoms, I went into premature labor. I was also septic, so after delivering our boy, I was very unwell. To say it was tragic and traumatic would be an understatement. We named him, and for the purposes of this post, we'll call him H. At the time, my older son, A, was 2.5 years old, too young to really understand anything except that Mummy was sick in the hospital. We haven't purposely not told him about H. We will in time, but there was no reason to confuse him at such a young age. We don't talk a lot about H at home. H is not a name that is familiar to our older son for any reason. In around July this year, I was driving A to a Saturday morning activity when he said, "Mummy, you should meet my friend H. He's here in the car with us," and pointed to the ceiling of the car. I didn't want to overreact or ask too much in case he felt the need to make things up, so I simply said, "That's good, eh? Is he a nice friend?" And he said yes. I told my partner and we both had the same reaction. Weird coincidence, but also kids have imaginary friends often, not a big deal. The next day, A told my partner that H is here when they were playing in our lounge room. My partner asked, "Oh, okay, where is he now?" And A pointed in the air to the corner of the room above where he keeps H's ashes, on the top of our bookshelf. A then said, "He's like an astronaut, he can float in space." A few days later, when my partner took A off to childcare, I gave A a kiss and hug as I always do at the front door. A then turned to his left and enthusiastically says, "Bye H, I'm off to school," before running out the door. By now, my partner and I are just looking at each other in absolute amazement. Over the next few weeks, this happened several more times. Sometimes A told us that H is asleep, so would stay in the car if we arrived at our destination. A also told me that H was in hospital, not an astronaut anymore. That freaked me out a little, as of course the only time we could hold H was in hospital. Our only memories of him physically were in that setting, but mostly these visitations felt special and a bit magical. The final time H visited, that we know of, occurred in the car again, just A and I. He told me, "H is here with us, Mummy," and curiosity got the better of me. I asked, "A, is H a man or a little boy with you?" And he said to me, with a tone like I really should know this already, "No, Mummy, H is just a little baby. Sometimes I can hold him." And he cradled his arms like he was holding a small baby. That was absolutely an holy crap moment, but also a wow moment. I was raised agnostic atheist, so it's all a bit overwhelming to ponder on too much, but we have decided it was H just letting us know he's okay and with us still, somehow. A few weeks later, I found out I was pregnant again. I like to think H was there with us through the early weeks, and is with us still, always a special part of our family. I do believe young children can see things we can't explain. I'm so glad A had this chance, though he most likely won't remember it. Thanks for listening along. Case file number 428, written by Alderan Survivor. When the universe temporarily gives you a massive IQ boost. So after graduating college, I went on a Euro trip with my best friend. We started out in England and worked our way south to France, east to Prague, and about the second week in, we landed in Italy, Venice. It's about midday, sunny, and we are dead tired and beat from the train ride, and the only thing we want to do is find our hostel and sleep. Note, neither of us speak any language other than English and a teeny bit of Spanglish. We're Texan. After getting off the boat and literally wandering around to a main part of the city, again, Venice, I see this smiling older gentleman and ask, in Spanish, "Hablas English?" He smiles, wide, says, "Sí, sí." All I do is pull out the reservation of the hostel and point to the top of the page, circa 2000. Didn't exactly have a smartphone. Hell, we didn't bring one. The old guy just starts speaking in Italian. All I remember is "claro, claro," and literally gives me directions for 3 to 4 minutes, pointing and gesturing with his hands and arms. When he gets done, my friend just looks at me with that "what the hell" look and says, "Did you understand any of that?" Just stare off, look him dead in the eye and say, "No, not a word, but I know exactly where to go, and I don't know how." Now, if you've never been to Venice, it's a freaking Pan's Labyrinth with no distinguishable streets. We're literally talking back alleys and streets that cross through and over the water. Well, 15 minutes later, we arrive at the church and hostel combo, and all I remember is going to bed and passing out. I didn't understand a lick of any other language that whole trip, but will, for the rest of my life, never be able to explain or repeat how we got there. I can't do the story justice with the number of turns and back alleys we took, and my friend just kept asking, "How do you know where to go? Even if you somehow understood him, there's no way you could remember all of this." Case file number 429, written by KitKoo1. My property keeps running away from me. This only happened to me twice, but I can't help but notice a pattern. First thing was a mug I liked. I bought it years ago. It had a pretty kitty and a stiletto painted on it, and I'm a big fan of cats, so I was happy with the purchase. Unfortunately, the mug broke soon after I bought it, but I promised myself I'd find a replacement. Years later, I found the exact same mugs in a different store. Overjoyed, I bought one. Sometime later, I recounted the story of a replaced broken mug to my mom, and she asked, "Where's the mug now?" I hesitated. I looked all over for it, but it was gone. It just disappeared like I had never bought it in the first place. The second item was a bracelet with golden hearts. About 3 weeks ago, I put it on too tight and it broke on my wrist. I kinda shrugged it off because it wasn't expensive, but my handy colleague fixed it for me. I wanted to wear the bracelet for my best friend's wedding, but today it's nowhere to be found. I looked all over the house but came up empty. Remember, I just wore it 3 weeks ago. I can't help but think it disappeared because it was meant to stay broken. What do you think? A glitch or two coincidences? Case notes, file number 429. Right, so disappearing object phenomenon just strikes again. Just myself, I must have narrated nearly 100 of these stories over my years. That's what I've managed to read, and this is discounting all the stories posted that I haven't captured with my own voice yet, or never even written. How many times do you think someone loses an item and simply assumes, well, I must have misplaced it somewhere, or someone stole it, or it fell and properly through physics bounced to some unknown spot? All logical reasons one could make a reasonable claim for, but they have no clue this effect is occurring to others, all the time, every day. You know, it is fascinating, but it also makes me a little nervous. What if something extremely important just ups and vanishes one day? Like a critical component in a space shuttle just before launch. The hydraulic action for the rig of a semi. You name the countless horrors that could occur from this. What about a necessary piece in the GPS function of a plane? So the plane just works but flies in the wrong place because everything is not by sight when you're in a plane, is by GPS coordinates. Hell, maybe this is what's causing a lot of the catastrophes that are just going unexplained all over the place. Maybe. Case file number 430, written by Sketchy Merkvalank. From an ethereal being to being shifted onto another planet. You won't want to miss this story. This happened years ago, so some details may be somewhat confusing. I know what I'm about to say may sound crazy, silly, or whatever, but I swear to God it's absolutely true. When I was much younger, maybe I was about 14 or 15 years old, more or less. My father used to take me occasionally to the company's facilities where he worked, as far as I understand, as manager, general boss of the company's employees, and as the right hand of the owner whom he had been friends with since many years ago, so we knew the owner's family and his children. On some of the occasions that I went to the company, it coincided with the fact that the owner also brought there some of his sons, who I got along with very well, specifically a son whom I'll call RC. I don't know if that still exists today, but at least in some past days in front of that company, crossing a dirt road, were one old, very spacious mansion, practically abandoned, that belonged to the owner's family. I remember that the mansion was of 3 levels, had space of pool without water, many bedrooms for both guests and servants, still had windows, floors of what appeared to be checkered marble, rotten wooden doors, mirrors in the bathrooms in some rooms. It had a large spiral staircase that connected the 3 levels. It was one of those typical stairs that let you see the rest of the levels above you in a cylindrical way, so to speak. Also had a bit of antique furniture, and I even remember that in one of the rooms there were 3 school papers and children's drawings. Only in a few parts of that mansion had electricity, but it lit up in a very vague way. All of that was dirty and unkept, with dust and some animals such as cockroaches and spiders, in addition to the dogs that were kept there in the very large backyard of the mansion, where there were some stone tables that RC and I sometimes used to eat what we took from the company to that house. We used to play hide and seek and talk about whatever it was while time passed to get away from there. We weren't always there. We also did other things in the company. These were good times. They were really my best years. But at the time, maybe I was not aware of that, before life got complicated. Before all of that happened to us, the strangest thing that had happened to us in those mansions was hearing what seemed to be voices of non-existent people. One day, RC and I were in the backyard when we saw how one of the company security guards came out of the mansion, greeted us, and walked towards us. This was too rare, something very new, since as far as I remember, no guard or employee could enter the mansion, with the obvious exception of our parents, who we thought had sent it for us. So we got up from the table, we said something to him that I don't remember, and we walked towards him, but suddenly that security guard literally disappeared into thin air. Very quickly, he just vanished. In less than we could think, he was no longer there. This puzzled and scared us, since we thought we had seen some kind of ghost or something like that. So we entered the mansion to cross it and go to the company. Then we both started to feel headaches, so strong that we stopped our walking and complained a lot of pain, almost screaming. It was a horrible pain, as if sharp things were stuck in our head. At the same time, we suffered chills, dizziness, nausea, and we saw how the light entering through the windows would darken in a blurry way, thus also darkening where we were. Little by little, all that we felt was disappearing until we were almost calm, and I say almost because we were very cold. Our bodies were cold. We were shivering and we released like steam from our mouths, but everything around us felt warm, normal, not too hot and not too cold at all. It was strange. It had no logic, but it was undeniable what we lived. I don't remember what we said to each other, but we were definitely scared, puzzled, not knowing what was happening. I think I was the first to open the door and go outside, where to my absolute surprise, absolutely everything around us, everything that was there before, the company, some other companies in the distance, the public lighting, everything, absolutely everything, had completely disappeared. The only thing that was seen was this immeasurable earthy desert that at times seemed to acquire a slight color between metallic and purple. In this desert, there were some plants with strange designs. They were exotic plants that we did not know. I will try to describe it as best as possible with the words I know. What was most notable about this vegetation was a shrub with half-transparent leaves. These leaves seemed to be bent geometrically as if they were elongated triangles next to each other in a spiral shape. From this bush came a trunk similar to the trunk of a palm tree, but somewhat wavy. This trunk became branches where there were flowers with a similar appearance to the bush, only they had elongated stuffed fingers that remained static in the air in different directions. It must have been about 3 meters high. This plant is the one I remember the most because when I got close to it and tried to touch it, my body began to itch and burn. This of course bothered me. I moved away from there and that pain disappeared. RC went out a little time after me towards that desert and we saw the sky and it was clear. Some stars were seen from time to time. They were seen as white lines moving intelligently in different directions, appearing and disappearing. There was no moon or sun, but somehow everything was lit up in a pale white color. In the distance, on the horizon, wherever we saw the atmosphere seemed to be distorted. A quick wave of fear began to overtake us. It was an inexplicable horror. which inevitably caused us some screams of terror and made us feel that if we stayed outside the mansion, we would die at any moment. So we rapidly went back to the mansion, but as soon as we ran inside, instantly as we walked through the door, we were hit by what felt like a screen of electrifying air. And then we were already in a different place, inside the mansion at the same time. I don't know how to say it. It was as if our stalks were divided for seconds after appearing. Suddenly we were already in the backyard of the mansion, sitting at the table of stone with our food in front of us. Surprisingly, everything around us, the sky, everything looked normal. We looked normal, although obviously our minds were extremely confused, and our bodies were still very cold. Although the environment was warm, but we were very, very cold, almost hypothermic. And this would have been the only evidence of what happened to us. But unfortunately, when we managed to enter the company, the cold had already disappeared. Our bodies returned to their normal temperature. Obviously, our parents did not believe us, and nobody did. But it would be useless to try to deny what we lived through. It really did happen. It was not our imagination, and obviously, we were not drugged. That experience left me so disturbed. I was so scared that sometime later, when my father took me back to that place, that I no longer wanted to leave his office. I did not dare to return to the mansion. Just seeing it there left me with a very bad feeling. Then I never went to the company again, and with the passage of time, I did not see RC again, although I sometimes found out about his life. It is an experience that I will never forget. It really made me believe much more than I already did in supernatural things, situations beyond all explanation. At least in this life, we may never know what happened to us that day, but whatever it was, I never ever want to experience anything like it again. Case file number 431, written by Large Marge in Charge. The Colossal Cookie Coincidence. Alright, I lived in Argentina with a fellow group of North Americans. There were 6 of us. Well, I had been there about 6 months, and while I love the culture and food, you start to miss stupid little things, mostly because they are impossible to acquire, especially in Argentina, as they have a strict no-import law. But here we are one hot, humid summer day in our little shack of a house with no air conditioner, and I just couldn't get over this craving I had been having for a few days. It was for those stupid little Keebler elf fudge cookies. You know, the ones that look like a little elf in reverse Oreo style. So I'm just sitting here, thinking about these cookies, man, and here's where it gets weird. We all worked in the same office, and in Argentina, you just don't get stuff by mail often, and never stuff from out of the country. You had to go into the city and pick them up at customs. I was the guy that did that, the only guy. Well, we had just finished lunch when the mailman came by with a package from my friend, who was sitting next to me, and the other guy who received the packages comes in and hands it to him, which is again super weird. It even showed up. And here's the thing, it was so impossible to get those cookies. I never even mentioned it to anyone, but he opens the package in a microwave oven-sized brown box. And what is on the very top of that package uncovered? The cookies! He had no idea I wanted them so much, but he grabs the cookies and looks up with a smile and says, "You guys want some?" I still can't believe it. Not only should this have never happened, but it would have taken 4 to 6 weeks to arrive if I asked for some from the US. Case notes, file number 431. Okay, I have to admit, stories like this and other occurrences from my own life lead me down the path of thinking more that life is a grand game. I've spoken about this hypothesis a few times in referencing explanations to other types of glitches. For instance, quantum immortality would be the act of transferring our character data to another server. Then we have instances where in our own lives, things that shouldn't fit and fall into place just do, for whatever reason. If you think back on it, you realize, hey, what the hell? Everything went right as rain, and the odds of that are astronomical. Sure, coincidence. Maybe there's nothing here besides the phenomenal luck of the cookie draw, but my gut says yeah. You, for some reason, needed to have those cookies so the game of life would continue along the path it should have. Case file number 432, written by Ziggy the Pineapple. Hairnets in coffee mugs. What a weird timeline. Items randomly appear in the apartment with no reasonable explanation. My girlfriend and I recently moved into a new apartment, just a little shy of 2 months ago. Weird things have happened since the beginning here, like stove dials and sinks being left on. But most of this can be explained, since we both tend to forget turning things on and off from time to time. But today was different. Today, while getting ready to go out for dinner, my girlfriend noticed something in our bathroom. She has a coffee mug that she uses to keep her hair elastics in. Other than a few bobby pins, the only thing that is ever in this cup is hair elastics. But today, as she was getting ready, she noticed that there were 2 perfectly intact hairnets in the mug as well. There is absolutely no reasonable explanation as to why these hairnets would be in the mug. Neither one of us uses hairnets. The only time she has ever used a hairnet is for when she used to dance, and that was over 8 years ago now. Plus, she uses that coffee mug every day, and I've even seen her use it and wash it since we moved here. I have absolutely no idea how something like this could have happened. I would almost be comfortable with the idea of an intruder, but how would an intruder know exactly where in our bathroom cupboard to put something as specific as a hairnet in my girlfriend's hair elastics mug? It all just seems way too odd. Case file number 433, written by Chordzi, an aircraft frozen in time. In my early 20s, I was walking to work one morning. It was a clear morning in spring, with my headphones on listening to music. Poodling around, minding my own business. I turn a corner, look up, and see a huge passenger plane flying low. It was so low you could see the windows. Planes make a lot of noise, and that noise would be heard over my headphones. This was in the days before any noise-canceling headphones. My headphones were good, but not that good. So I take off my headphones, and that plane was silent. It was just hovering, maybe 100 or so feet off the ground. My distance approximations aren't great. I was weirded out but kept walking, otherwise I would have been late for work. I lived and worked in a village in the middle of nowhere, in England at the time, so being about 8 AM, there wasn't anyone around. I was so freaked out I put my headphones back on and kept walking, trying to ignore this impossibility. Every time I speak about this, people don't believe me, but it was one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced. Wish I'd taken my phone out and taken a picture, but I was so miffed by the whole experience I never thought to do so. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Case file number 434, written by Hopeful Ladybug. Keys open doors, but who was controlling this key? So a few days ago, my keys were stolen after I forgot them on my front door. Not smart, I know. I came back home from a doctor's appointment and probably got distracted and forgot them in the lock. Around 6 PM that day, I decided to go get some groceries and couldn't find my keys. I spent almost an hour looking for them before thinking maybe they were stolen. I decided to call my landlord and he told me there were some random guys in the building the entire afternoon. It was too late already for him to get a new lock, so he told me he'd be there the next morning at 8 AM to change a lock. I obviously didn't feel safe knowing someone had my key, but I knew the door couldn't be opened if I kept my spare key in the lock from the inside. So that night, I carefully put the key in the lock before going to bed. I know I did, because it was the only way I could sleep safely. Otherwise, someone could have literally walked in. They had the keys to the 3 locks on my door. I put the key in the main lock, the one that really allows you to open the door, and locked the other 2. My bedroom door is in the hallway about 2 meters from the door, and if someone walks in, I can hear it. The door makes a lot of noise when you open it, so I would have heard if someone tried to come in. I fell asleep around 3 AM, was a little anxious, and woke up at 7:45 AM to wait for my landlord. He showed up at 8:15, and when I went to open the door, the 2 locks were closed, but the spare key I used was outside the door. At first I shrugged it off and didn't think much of it. But then I realized, how on earth did this happen? My landlord changed the other 2 locks, but not the main one that day. It's still safe, don't worry. So later, I asked a friend to come in and help me check if you can open the door when the key is left in the lock from the inside, and it's not possible, as I thought. I have no idea how the key ended up back outside. My other key is definitely lost because I've been searching for them ever since. My place isn't really big, and I don't have much clutter or potential places they could be. So yeah, I don't know what happened, but it was really weird. Bonus file, written by Frazier P. A Paranormally Murdered Guide. When I was young, I wanted to buy a Ouija board to play around with friends. However, when I went to grab one at the store one day with my mom, she strictly advised me against it. I found it odd that she was so provoked by the idea of it, but I didn't think too much of it beyond this. A few years later, when we were on holiday in Hawaii, the topic came up and she told us the story of her experience with one. When my mom was little, maybe 8 or 9 years old, her and her friends were messing around with one. They began talking to a girl who claimed to have been murdered. As the conversation went on, they learned she had been killed by her boyfriend and that her body had been dumped under a bridge near where she lived in England. They decided to visit the site, not thinking they would find anything, but when they got to the bridge, they were shocked to find a murdered woman next to the bridge. When the police interviewed my mom and her friends, they simply did not believe the story and thought somehow they were involved with the murder. However, when the boyfriend was in fact proven guilty, the whole scenario was deemed a coincidence. Case file number 435, written by Ahedrich 62985. Missing items? Old news. Now we have missing organs. When my husband and I found out I was pregnant with baby number 2, we were surprised but overjoyed. It had taken us a while and lots of scans to get pregnant with number 1, so not needing the intervention with 2 was relieving. We did, however, decide that number 2 would be our only other child, so I opted for a C-section to get my tubes tied as well. The pregnancy was normal. I had normal scans, everything went great. At 37 weeks, I went into labor and was taken for my C-section. My beautiful baby girl arrived and the doctor went to tie my tubes. However, there was only one fallopian tube. "When did you have surgery to remove your right fallopian tube?" he asked. "Never," I replied. Even scans during this pregnancy showed both of my fallopian tubes intact. "Miss, your right fallopian tube was surgically removed. There is scar tissue and everything from a clear surgical procedure." My doctor was baffled. He searched through all of my medical records and could not find a reason for my fallopian tube to be gone. I did not have any surgery between that scan and the C-section, so there was legitimately no reason for it to not be there. He insisted it was clearly a past medical procedure due to the nature of the scar tissue, but could not explain how or when. Needless to say, only one tube ended up tied because the other one had been clearly removed. To this day, it gives me the chills. I truly have no explanation for it. Case notes, file number 435. Okay, so here's the thing. I don't believe this was a disappearing object phenomena, even though technically any matter, organic or not, should be fair game for that effect to occur on. I wouldn't discount DOP as a possibility, but the fact your doctor kept referring to highly specific and distinctive scar tissue makes me think of only 2 possibilities. So the mundane possibility, during the brief gap during your last scan and giving birth to your little girl, you were somehow drugged, abducted by some kind of cartel that surgically harvested your fallopian tube, but only one, then put you right back where you were before they abducted you, with no one the wiser, including yourself. Also note that any drug that would cause you to lose consciousness would have heavy lingering effects, unlike the movies would show. In fact, the people responsible for putting you under, an anesthesiologist, they're highly paid because it's a dangerous practice and not at all as easy as the movies would have you believe. Or, let's bring out the aliens, baby. Seriously though, it's the only clear explanation in my mind. Presumably, aliens would still require tools and surgery to remove matter from a human body, without killing them at least, and then scar tissue would form, no matter how sharp or precise an instrument is. Only an alien abduction could be done so cleanly in the limited time with no one noticing, not even yourself. I wouldn't be too scared though. I don't think they'd be coming back. If this is in fact what happened, they already took what they wanted. But why on earth would they want a human fallopian tube? Are these aliens trying to create a human hybrid? Ooh, this is getting very weird. Bonus file, written by Anonymous. A flash, then a pool of floating milk. I don't know if this was paranormal. I tend to think that it was because there's no explanation for it that I can think of. But anyway, here goes. By the way, I never told this to anyone because I think that people would think we are insane. I still think that you guys probably still will, but it's something extra weird. To me at least, and should be told. So be it. This was in the late 2000s. I don't remember exactly the year, and it happened to my then wife and myself in our home. We lived in a nice quiet area. Our home was at the end of a road. In front of our house, there was obviously a road. On each side, we had neighbors whose homes were anywhere from 50 to 100 feet away. On the back of the house, it was woods for miles and miles. We used to love seeing all the wildlife that would enter our property at one time or another. But as I said, the biggest plus was how peaceful it was. It was wintertime in southern Massachusetts, a cloudy night but no storms, and it was around 11:30 at night. We were in our living room just watching some movies. I was relaxing on an easy chair, lazy boy style. My wife was sitting on a small couch about 6 feet from me. There was no noise but for the movie going on, and all of a sudden there was a flash. Everything went all white for a tiny fraction of a second, like all you could see was just the color white. And when that was over, really quickly as you may imagine, something was very different. You see, that room was a really huge addition that the house's previous owners had done, I guess sometime in the 90s. They built that and a sizable deck outside. The room was very large and had cathedral ceilings, which at its top must easily have reached 15 feet. This is a guess, I don't know for sure. It looked like it would go up forever. On the ceiling, there were a bunch of small lights and a skylight. Being nighttime, the skylight looked like a black square and the lights were providing great illumination. Courtesy of a dimmer, the lights were just right, not too strong, not too weak. Well, right after that flash had gone, I looked up at the ceiling and what I saw froze me in place. Gone were the lights, gone was the square skylight that was dark because it was night. Starting from about 7 feet up from the floor, yes, we had stood up and could easily have touched it. There was what looked like an inverted, as an upside down, pool of what looked like, for the lack of better words, milk. But it had a strange glow to itself. I watched, fascinated, as this white stuff rippled gently with small waves, like it really was a thick liquid. My mind was horrified and curious at the same time because I couldn't think of any phenomenon that could have caused what I'm seeing. A pool of glowing milk, lazily rippling, suspended above our heads. I immediately thought that I must have imagined that, and to get confirmation that I wasn't having some medical emergency that made me see things, I looked at my wife who was on the couch. She was staring up at the same thing, with her mouth open. All of a sudden, in another flash and in the blink of an eye, that pool of white stuff wasn't there any longer. It had lasted maybe 10 seconds, and everything had gone back to normal. My wife turned to look at me wild-eyed, and I said, "Did you just see that?" And she said, "Yes." I asked her what she thought it was, and she said she had no idea. I dabbled with the idea that this was somehow some odd lightning thing, but there wasn't any storm, and I'm not aware of any natural phenomenon with these characteristics. Nothing was damaged. In that room, there was a good deal of electronics, and what we saw looked damn solid. As I said, the consistency and look of regular milk. I remember thinking that the ripples and waves I was seeing in that stuff were something that, had they hit your body, you'd have really felt them. It felt like whatever this was, it had substance. In any case, this really spooked me, big time. Case notes, bonus file. Okay, so not very much to say on this, besides that it's an absolutely fascinating read, and a glitch unlike any I've ever read before. All I can say is that the one thing that pops into my head when reading this is fluidic space in Star Trek Voyager. There's this other species that's in another dimension, not a parallel universe, but another dimension, a layer above, and in their universe, the very space itself has a fluidity to it. There is mass in it. So it's almost like you had a perception of a higher level dimension, where in it, you could visualize and see there's this milky white essence to the very nature of space-time itself in this dimension. I don't know if that's at all what happened, but that is what my mind was going to when I read this. Truly fascinating. Bonus file, written by Raspberry Waterfall. Santa Claus paying a visit. Maybe evil Santa. When I was 8 or 9, I saw something weird on Christmas Eve. This was many, many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still believed in Santa Claus then, as a good amount of children do, and I had the usual anxiety and excitement for Santa to leave Christmas presents under the tree. After I went to bed, I had some trouble going to sleep with holiday nerves and such. I had finally drifted off when I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps somewhere in my room. I automatically assumed it was Santa Claus, and I was scared to see him for fear that he might leave or his magic would fail. I opened one eye just barely and saw this black figure standing over my bed staring at me. It was tall, probably around 6 feet tall, and it was completely dark. In a way, it looked almost blacker than even black itself could describe. I couldn't see any eyes, a mouth, or a nose on it, but I could clearly see the outline of a head, arms, body, and legs. It looked like a bigger person, so thinking it was Santa just made sense. It stayed in one spot for 10, maybe 15 seconds, until it took a few steps closer. It leaned in a little more, still a few feet away from me, and then stayed there for 10 to 15 seconds more. Even though I couldn't see a face, I knew it was looking right at me. It's just that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched or looked at. I closed my eyes again and waited for a few minutes. When I looked back, it was gone. I lived in a pretty old house at the time, so the doors and floorboards were squeaky and loud. I heard footsteps, but I never heard the door open. I never saw this figure again, though I've had some other spooky experiences in this house. I asked my mom if she heard Santa when he came into my room last night, and she looked confused for a second. Then she played along and just assumed I was lying, or that my imagination was on hyperdrive. I know this wasn't a person, and I know this wasn't a dream. I also know that spirits and entities are often attracted to lots of excitement and energy, so Christmas would be a perfect time for a ghost to pass through. Case file number 436, written by BreadSpace3. There was me, and then there was me. I grew up in a very small, rural, yet scenic town. You know, the kind that lays dormant until warm weather brings cottagers and tourists. That summer, I was 18. I was involved with a guy, we'll call him Jack, who had a lake house nearby. I'm 22 now, and I haven't seen him since. The summer I was 20, I lived and worked in the city I'd moved to for college. I avoided my hometown, which was 3 hours away by car, at the time, only going back briefly that year for Christmas. But one day, I got a random text from Jack. "Hey, it was so great catching up with you today. I'd love to hang out sometime like you suggested. When did you say you were off?" It took a while to explain to him that I hadn't spent more than 72 consecutive hours in that town in almost a year. Apparently, I had called his name back when he called mine from across the street. We'd talked about the old days, and I'd given him a brief life update, and what I had said about what I was up to these days included some information that he had no way of knowing. For the record, this wasn't the only time someone claimed to have seen me in my hometown when I was gone. It's just the most memorable. Case notes, file number 436. Right, so the first quick gut draw in this analysis of the story is that it would be a doppelganger. But of all the stories I've read of doppelgangers, almost all of them always appear to be near the one they're impersonating, usually to cause them distress or even direct harm. If they have any motive, it's to be creepy. No, I chalk this up to another instance of astral projection, especially given that this has occurred multiple times and no one who interacted with the other you ever noticed anything off. Doppelgangers give off a vibe, almost like an uncanny valley spookiness. You know when it's a doppelganger. Bonus file, written by Avini. My Bald Cat, the Superior Demon. I encountered a haunted apartment for the first time in my life. I started officially dating my now boyfriend at the end of May 2021, but before that, we practically have been in a relationship for a few weeks. During that time, I would occasionally spend time at his apartment, and he would come over to mine. Everything was totally fine, except for the fact that I could not sleep properly in his flat. I thought it was only because it's a new place for me, and I simply wasn't comfortable enough yet. Nothing out of the ordinary has happened during a time when we're not official. After the day when I agreed to date him, I went over to his apartment to stay the night, just like I usually did. That night, I could not fall asleep because of fear I had never experienced before. I was sleeping on the side of the bed that faced the hallway. The door was never closed because his dog needs to walk around the apartment. She sometimes loves to eat in the middle of the night or just lay on the cold floor when it gets hot. That night, I constantly felt like something was watching me from the hallway. Something that clearly didn't want me to be there. Something evil. After that, I thought that I was just stressed out and not used to the new place. And that, my friends, was just the start. Each time I would spend the night, it would get worse and worse. The fear was getting worse, and the only time I felt safe enough to fall asleep was either when my boyfriend was still awake or after the sunrise. I was watched more and more, and every day I felt like some scary creep wanted me gone as soon as possible. After 2 weeks or so, I was scared to death to even use the bathroom at night. I was scared to pull my blanket and look at the hallway. During that time, I noticed that his dog would never leave the room at night, which was really strange. She would stare at the hallway, get up from her sofa, bark at something, and then run back. She was visibly scared and uncomfortable, and her usual way of sleeping changed drastically. Cherry went from being a chill dog who snored quietly to someone constantly moaning in her sleep while constantly moving around as if she was having nightmares. One night when my boyfriend was not asleep, I went to the bathroom, which has tempered glass on the door. You could see someone passing by, but it would just be a silhouette. As I was doing my business there, I saw a very tall shadow go back and forth a few times. It was clearly not the dog, and it looked too tall to be my boyfriend, but I brushed it off and went back to the room. My boyfriend was laying on the bed, peacefully dozing off while watching something on the phone. I asked him why he got up, and he was very confused. After I told him that I saw someone wandering around the hallway, he looked freaked out. He said that he always knew that something evil lives here, and then described the exact same thing I saw. He told me about his previous experience with an overwhelming sense of fear and the way he felt being watched all the time. It happened occasionally, so he managed to ignore it most of the time. Just to clarify, I never told him about these things, so everything he told me freaked me out even more. When I was home, I got enough sleep so that I was pretty much full energy. But as soon as I entered his apartment, I felt extremely tired to the point where I could barely keep my eyes open. Then I started getting very emotionally unstable, having weird meltdowns that came from nowhere. It instantly stopped when I got out of the apartment. My things like perfumes would fall from the shelf randomly. One of my favorite ones fell down into the soft pile of clothes and shattered, which seemed very strange. My boyfriend started having work-related and financial issues that took him by surprise because everything was fine before. The strangest thing we've noticed is that all of those creepy things only happened when I was in the apartment. As soon as I'd left, everything was going back to normal. He didn't feel scared or watched anymore. When I came back, it all started again. After a week, I would get the same feeling in my apartment, being watched, scared to death, being unwelcome in my own home. That thing seemed to have followed me. Every single night became unbearable. If I managed to fall asleep, I would wake up from a terrible nightmare. I was scared of turning the lights off, just like in my boyfriend's apartment. I felt like I was going insane. When I told my boyfriend about this, he was even more terrified because it seemed like that creature, whatever it was able to leave the apartment and follow the person it wanted to leave. One day, we were searching the apartment, checking every corner for strange things. In Ukraine, many people are religious, so they believe in some sort of black magic and didn't find anything. However, we saw glue residue above the door to our room, over the entrance to the hallway, and over the entrance to the kitchen. When he moved to this place, he noticed that previous owners left their icons, the ones with Jesus and his holy friends, but he shrugged it off. When we checked them that day, we also noticed some sticky tape residue. It looked as if previous owners hung them in order to keep that scary crap trapped in the hallway. After going through the apartment, we realized that our fear got much worse when we stood in the middle of the hallway facing the bathroom and the restroom doors. They are separated in older buildings. We pretty much found the source of our horror's liver. It was right in the middle of those two doors. That night, I got back home, and my boyfriend texted me that he will hang one of the icons right above those doors because our people believe that these things will protect you from any type of cursed and scary crap. A few minutes later, he calls me and says that as soon as he touched the icon, he felt extremely sick to his stomach and scared like he's never been before. His phone lost the signal and the Wi-Fi stopped working as well. He was terrified, but still decided to put the icon up. After a couple of days, things were starting to get better. We didn't feel scared and watched anymore, but would still get chills randomly. The dog was able to leave the room during the night, but still seemed a bit worried. I decided to move in with him in July because it felt pretty safe at that point. Weird occasional chills aside. When I brought my cat there, everything stopped completely. She's bald and suspicious looking, so I think that evil thing mistook her for a more superior demon. To this day, we have no clue what happened and why that thing wanted to get rid of me so badly. The icon is still in the hallway, and we live a peaceful life now. Case file number 437, written by Paper Tiger. Emergency nail clippers missing. To start, I spend a lot of time at my desk. I mean a lot. Especially over the past couple years, and taking online classes and generally having nothing else to do. I pretty much sit here for an extended period of time every single day. I also have a particular thing where I cannot stand the feeling of having long fingernails or even having my nails extend past my fingertips. If I don't have nail clippers on hand, whenever I get the urge to shorten them, I pick at them subconsciously until they're a mess, so I always try to have a pair accessible. With that said, I've kept a pair of nail clippers in my right desk drawer for as long as I can remember, switching them out when they get dull and whatnot, so I can quickly just reach in and fix my nails without having to pick at them. I'm a little bit obsessive about my nails, so I'd say I'd probably use them at least several times a week, and since I'm always sitting at my desk when I use them, I always put them right back in the drawer when I'm done. One day, sometime in the past couple of months, I noticed my nails getting longer than my liking, so I reached into my drawer only to find that the clippers just weren't there. I thought maybe I'd left them sitting on the surface of the desk, or maybe I'd put them in the other drawer, but no matter where I looked, I couldn't find them for anything. I asked my fiancé if he'd seen them or knew where they were, and he said he didn't touch them. Finally, I got up to see if maybe they'd fallen on the floor somewhere, or I'd taken them to the bedside table and just didn't remember doing it. But they were seriously nowhere to be found, so basically I just gave up and resigned myself to buy a new pair the next time I went to the store. I remember the next few days really sucked because I could feel my nails getting longer and I had no way of trimming them, so I just stuck it out and tried to resist the urge to pick at them. One day, as I'm just sitting there, minding my own business, probably watching something on YouTube or playing a game, I don't know, I suddenly just became aware of the fact that my lost nail clippers were just sitting right there in front of me on my desk, right in front of my keyboard. I didn't see them materialize or anything. It was more along the lines of literally just becoming aware of their existence. I know for a fact that they hadn't been on my desk the whole time because I searched pretty thoroughly the moment I realized that they were missing, and yet here they were, front and center on my desk. I showed it to my fiancé and he thought it was really weird too, and we were both pretty much just scratching our heads at that point. Weird things like this seem to happen to me all my life, but this was the most recent and prominent instance of something disappearing and reappearing randomly. Wondering if something just likes messing with me or if it's actually returning my lost stuff. Case notes. I too am obsessed with keeping my nails neatly trimmed because I pick at them too if they aren't. They can get jagged, which is awkward whenever handling clothing. So you're not alone in that little tick, nor are you alone in having an object disappear and then reappear on you. Your experience is more unique in the way it returned, in plain sight. I find how you described it very intriguing. Not like the nail clippers popped back into existence, but as if your mind was literally not allowed to process their existence. Then a switch was flipped, and you were made aware of them again. Almost like they were always there, but the programming wasn't coded to enable interaction. Bonus file, written by Cheap Squealer, The Ghost Bouquet. Hi everyone. To introduce myself and give a bit of context, I am a French wedding photographer, and I've worked mainly along the Atlantic coast. I'm 32 years old and have about 170 wedding reportages completed. I'm not a strong believer in the paranormal, although I am very interested in the subject. It's something very far from my mind when I am working on a wedding report. However, as I read more stories, I began to rethink my personal experiences, most of which took place in the course of my work during weddings. The ghost Bouquet. The first memory that came to me is quite recent. In October 2021, I had a wedding in a castle, and there had been a small incident at the start of the day because the bridal bouquet had been forgotten, or in all was nowhere to be found. The bride had to make her wedding without it. The next day, I started the selection of the photos on my computer at the time of the exit of the ceremony, where the couple went up the aisle among the guests. I was at the back of the room and I took photos of them facing me. There is a series of 8 photos taken from this moment, and on only one of them, the bride is holding a bouquet. On the 7 other photos, she has her hands totally empty. At the time, I didn't ask myself any more questions about this and joined this photo to the bride and groom in the selection. The bride phoned me almost immediately, completely taken aback, and asked if I had photoshopped her bouquet in her hands. Obviously I said no, since I had never seen it anyway and therefore never had a picture of it. Her reaction made me realize how strange this little detail I hadn't really noticed before was when I thought about it. It's bouquet, why on only one of the 8 photos when they were taken in a burst, so less than a second apart between each. Because the bride did recognize her bouquet, it was by no means another bouquet taken from the floral decoration. She also assured me that she was empty-handed during the moment. The discussion remained on hold, where no one had any explanation and where to bring up anything supernatural would have been totally inappropriate of me. Kid's disappearance. Another equally strange story from a few years ago. The cocktail was in a large room because it was raining all day. At a certain point, a person started to panic because their son was missing. Little by little, all the guests started to look for him. Searching every nook and cranny of the reception hall, which was relatively empty of hiding places, the kid was nowhere to be found. A few men even left in the rain to see if he hadn't had the idea of going out despite the bad weather, but nothing. I would like to point out that the room had no particular nook or long tablecloths on the tables. Absolutely no place a child could have been hiding. After about 20 minutes, I heard exclamations in the middle of the room where a crowd was gathering. The child was sitting idly on the chair in the middle of the room, absorbed in his portable console, as if he had always been there. His parents asked him where he had been, and the kid didn't seem to understand a word of the situation. He explained that he hadn't moved from his chair right in the middle of the room and hadn't seen or heard the panic and calls while the 120 guests were looking for him. On the other hand, 120 people did not see him in his chair for 20 minutes when he was theoretically in plain sight. Having been involved in the search as well, I'm pretty sure the kid wasn't where he reappeared. Again, a weird moment. Babies crying. One last, shorter anecdote to finish. During a wedding mass, church celebration, there was, as often, a baby screaming in the audience. The French churches, very large and made of nude stone, made the sounds particularly resonate, and the tears of the babies crying was frankly annoying. Being the only one who could move around mass, I looked a little annoyed at where the cries were coming from. There were not many guests, 60 people maximum, and the screaming baby could not be located. When going to the back, the crying seemed to come from the front and vice versa, and when I moved, it always seemed to come from somewhere else. People didn't seem to particularly look for the source of the noise, but I could see they were just as annoyed as I was, as were the priest and the bride and groom. As I walked out of the church, I watched carefully to see if any guests were going out with a baby, and none seemed to have any, either at this time or throughout the wedding day. Case notes. So the first story about the ghost bouquet has me most intrigued. My guess is it would be a spirit or entity that had been scheduled to get married herself, but died suddenly and wanted to relive the magic in any way she can. But of course, that's unfinished business that just cannot be solved. Very sad if that's the case. Case file number 438, written by ShopSuite9036. We heard the other, not as they should have been. Not sure what to make of these experiences, but they happened back to back. So a few nights ago, my cousin told me she was just in her room relaxing on her phone. She said at one point, she heard my voice behind her very clearly say her name. Not a whisper, but very clear and direct. She said she could easily tell that it was my voice, but that something was off about it. Something she couldn't point out, but she said something just felt different about it when she heard it. At the time, I was asleep in the living room. That was just the first experience. One day passed and nothing happened. The next day it was my turn. I stayed up early into the morning on the phone with my girlfriend. The last message I sent was at 1:22 in the morning. So she went to sleep and I was sitting on the couch for a few minutes just listening to music. I walked to the bathroom to pee and I hear my cousin. Her room is across from the bathroom and the hallway is kind of narrow. Through both of the doors I hear her giggling and laughing. I thought she was watching something on her phone that she found funny, and it sounded exactly like her laugh. There's a small crack in her door, so I just kind of glanced as I walked past. I didn't stop walking, but saw the light on her phone as I passed by. The next morning, I woke up and she was on the couch, parallel to the one I slept on. After I woke up, I started talking to her and making conversation about last night. I heard your goofy butt laughing last night, I said. She asked me when, to which I responded around 1:30 in the morning. She had gone to sleep at around 9 last night and hadn't woken up until well into the day. By this point, we were both thoroughly confused at these experiences. What creeps me out the most is that it was almost the same with her experience. Something about her laugh just seemed off, and the laughing I heard went on for a good 5 minutes or so. And she's a deep sleeper, so talking or laughing in her sleep is not a viable explanation, and if it were, it wouldn't explain what she heard 2 nights before, since we were in completely different rooms. Does anyone have any possible explanations? If so, I'd be open to hear them. Case notes, file number 438. So there are a few options that pop to mind. For the second event, where your cousin was sleeping but you saw her awake on her phone giggling, it is conceivable she was sleep interacting. Some folks don't realize they wake up in the middle of the night, several times even, and go about their business as if they're awake, but they aren't conscious, no one's at the helm. Complex tasks aren't engaged in usually. But going on one's phone, maybe that's what happened there. Some people even order stuff from Amazon while sleeping and think their accounts were hacked into. The only plot hole here would be if she does have this disorder, it wouldn't manifest itself only once. It would happen fairly frequently. If you never noticed it again or before, then it may not be this. Now hearing your voice behind her, that could either be projecting astrally while you're sleeping, or a poltergeist or trickster. Thing is, with tricksters you can often equate their personality and behavior with that of a petulant and bored child. If these events don't continue and even intensify, I'd assume the first explanation is more likely. But honestly, both of these explanations don't really encapsulate the entirety of the glitch, so it may not be these at all. In which case, I'd be stumped. Bonus file, written by Funky Butt Fumbling. A prank gone wild. Horror style. When I was in high school, there was a lot of local folklore about a man who allegedly shot and killed his wife and daughter before taking his own life in their family home. The incident occurred many years prior in a now abandoned 2-story home located between 2 wheat fields. I grew up in the boonies, so it was quite common for old farmhouses to be built in such a manner. The year was 2001, and my senior year had just begun a couple months prior. I don't remember the exact month, but I'm assuming October because I remember the crisp, cool, autumn air that had just rolled upon us. One evening, a group of about 8 or so friends and I decided we would visit the infamous home and scope it out for kicks. Before leaving my house, I had the idea I would play a prank on my pals, which involved a small bottle of red food coloring. I placed the food coloring in my pocket, locked my bedroom door, and left to meet up with the gang. We arrived at the location in 2 separate cars. One car was packed with the guys, the other car was driven by one of our female classmates and 2 of her girlfriends. The house was situated on a slight hill which met a gravel driveway. We parked our cars in the driveway in front of the home's garage and began our trek up the hill. the very first thing I noticed was a very sad, dead-looking tree located in the middle of the yard. The grass felt very strange beneath my feet, quite spongy and soft, as though it was rotted with disease. This particularly stood out to me because I had never felt grass quite like this before, especially without any recent rain. The house was completely boarded up with plywood, but there was a small opening in the front door which appeared to be broken from a previous visitor. Equipped with our flashlights, we began scoping out the interior of the home, searching for any evidence a murder actually took place. The interior was decorated with dingy floral wallpaper. The floors were bare hardwood throughout. In the main entryway, we saw what appeared to be blood splatters where the wall met the ceiling, and several apparent gunshot holes. I'm a skeptic by nature and thought it could have possibly been faked by previous visitors to feed into the lore. Whichever the case, the blood appeared a very dull brown color, indicating it had been there for a very long time. We walked up a set of creaky steps to the upstairs, which featured 2 bedrooms. One room had an old metal bed frame and a bare mattress, but was otherwise empty. I can't remember if I entered the second room or not. We all stood in one of the bedrooms talking and expressing our predictions as to what we believed happened before making our way back down the stairs. We continued exploring the main level, living space, and dining before reaching the kitchen. I noticed there was a door leading from the kitchen to a small breezeway behind the house. I was the first to check it out and knew this was the time to pull off my prank. As I entered the breezeway, I reached into my pocket, tilted my head back, and filled my entire eye socket with red food coloring. I banged my flashlight against the wall to create a loud thud, fell to the ground, and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Damn it! Something just hit me! Go, go, go!" We all bolted from the house at top speed. One of the girls even stumbled down the hill and collided with our passenger door. I entered the backseat of her car, holding my eye, screaming with my hands and face covered in fake blood. I remember the girl in the passenger seat yelling over and over, "Get him to the ER! Get him to the ER! His eyes are gone!" They frantically drove about 15 to 20 minutes to the nearest hospital as I writhed in pain in the back seat. The entire ride I was wailing, "Something hit me! I don't know what it was! What the hell just happened?" We finally got to the hospital parking lot with the other car right behind us. Everyone got out and we began swiftly walking to the entrance before I let out a maniacal laugh to reveal it was all a prank. A couple of the girls were pretty pissed, but the guys completely lost it and couldn't stop laughing. After several minutes, the mood lightened and the other girls finally sought humor in the situation. Overall, it was a hit. I got home late that night and cleaned up for school the next morning. When I woke up, everything felt completely off. I kept hearing what sounded like incessant whispering ringing in my ears. It reminded me of the sound of people whispering in church or at a funeral, with the sound of the letter S resonating the most. I walked over to my closet to grab a t-shirt and noticed a freezing cold spot in my room, just in front of my closet door. Our house didn't have central air, only heating vents in the floor, so this frigid spot made absolutely zero sense. I opened my closet door and every single piece of clothing was laying in a ball on the floor. I was dumbfounded because I locked my door before I left and always hung my clothes up, even my t-shirts. My house was empty that morning because my mom worked 12-hour night shifts and my little brother spent the night at our cousin's house because I knew I wouldn't get home until late the night before. As I walked downstairs to my living room, the whispering sounds intensified. Goosebumps covered my arm and my heart started to pound. I grew very alarmed as I realized this was more than just morning cobwebs or grogginess. I drove to school and the whispering sounds would not stop. I thought I was completely losing my mind, so I pulled one of my friends who is a devout Christian into the restroom and started crying. I told him I thought maybe I was haunted due to my antics from the night before. I tried my best to explain the situation, but I caught him off guard and didn't feel like he was taking me seriously. As the school day went on, the whispering sounds persisted and my friends, who were there for the shenanigans, couldn't stop talking about my prank. I did my best to hold myself together and not reveal that anything was wrong. I didn't want that kind of attention and especially didn't want them to think I was crazy, since a heart-to-heart with my Christian friend didn't go the way I anticipated. When the school day ended, I immediately checked my room and still felt the freezing cold spot in front of my closet. I truly believed at this point I was, without a doubt, being haunted. A few days went by, and I was having great difficulty sleeping. I kept seeing and envisioning a dark shadow in the corner of my room, about the height of a small child. I did my best to ignore it as the shadow began to move from one spot to another, eventually standing directly beside where I rested my head. The following day, I told my mom about my visit to the abandoned house and the prank I pulled on my friends. She was very disappointed I would disrespect the alleged murder victims, but she was also very supportive in finding me help. She's very spiritual and recommended I meet with a church member to get cleansed and also have my room cleansed. I did not and still don't subscribe to religion in the slightest. However, at that point, I was desperate. I went to the church and bared my soul to a priest, expressing sorrow for my actions, for fooling my friends, entering the abandoned house, and exploiting victims for my personal amusement. Later that evening, a member of the church came to my house, lit candles, and said a prayer in my bedroom. The next day, no more cold spots, no more audible whispering. After a week of feeling absolutely insane, it seemed to be over. About a month later, I developed a very deep depression. I began feeling incredibly dark emotions I had never felt before. These feelings would continue to grow through the winter and into spring of 2002 when baseball season rolled around. I was a lifelong baseball player who was being recruited by a few schools in the area. I was so depressed I opted not to play, forfeiting any possible chance at a scholarship and thus ending my baseball career. I strongly regret that decision today. I had simply lost interest in everything other than sleeping. I shut out my friends, parents, pretty much everyone for the next couple of months. By the time graduation rolled around, I ended up rekindling a friendship with one of my early childhood friends. He and I played baseball together back in first grade and were best friends in grade school. We kind of drifted apart over the years, but something drew us back together and we hung out all summer. The stronger our friendship became, the less apparent my depression was. It ultimately fizzled out by fall, and I ended up attending college out of state. 20 years later, the whispers haven't come back. No cold spots, no dark shadows, nothing. All put to rest. I haven't thought about my haunting in a very long time, but this past year it's crept up from time to time. No bad feelings, just memories. I've been wanting to tell this story for the past couple of months to hopefully aid anyone who may be experiencing something similar. Whether it was a true supernatural experience or my own fears manifested and projected into reality, I needed help, and I'm so very thankful I spoke up. Thanks especially to my mother, who pushed aside her disappointment to ensure her son was okay. If you're feeling off, please ask for help, no matter how silly your problems may sound. Peace. Case file number 439, written by Ari Lee. When you get light without a light bulb. I bought my grandmother's house with my husband over 10 years ago. My mother had lived there after my grandmother, and then she sold it out of the family. Those people lost the house and they bought it on a short sale because it never stopped being home to me. The house was built in the 1940s. My grandparents moved there in the late 50s, early 60s. They kept it beautifully. Primo 1970s and 80s decor, when I think back to growing up there. My granddad died in 1986 and my grandmother moved to a smaller house. My mom and stepdad moved in and my poor house went downhill. They did not upkeep and neither did the people my mother sold the house to after she was divorced. My poor house suffered more each year and then it sat empty for a few years until my husband and I bought it a little over 11 years ago. He's no handyman, but between us we were able to keep things from getting any worse. Recently, we have refinanced so we can make plans to fix some larger things that have been needed to be fixed for years. One of those things are the kitchen lights, 70-year-old fluorescent tubes. There are 4 of them arranged in a cross shape in the ceiling. They are old and need to be replaced. 2 of them always work, and 2 of them work sometimes. They may suddenly light up and work for 3 weeks, then will quit for a week only to light up again. I hate a dark room, so I'm always in a mood when only 2 lights are working. I was pleasantly surprised about 3 to 4 months ago when the 3rd light suddenly took a turn of working. It worked without fail until this past Sunday. I was so disappointed when I realized we were back down to 2 lights. I decided I would try to change the starter and bulb in hopes it would light up again. So I pulled a chair up to stand on and unscrewed the cover and reached up for the bulb. Only there was no bulb. None. It has been a few days now, and I still don't know what to think. My husband won't talk about it. When I get him to say something, he says it was working, so there had to be a bulb, and I point out that there was not. There have been a couple other glitches here, so I think he might be scared. I just asked out loud in the kitchen, if you could light up without a bulb all those months, why stop Thanksgiving week? Case notes, file number 439. You know, I wonder if your husband knows more than what he's letting on. The fact he won't talk about it at all, at least in how you typed it, makes me think he's probably seen even more weird things happening around the home and is honestly afraid. So I agree with your assessment on that. I don't blame him either. The whole notion of glitches could drive the best of us nutty. There are some folks who just love a good mystery. Most of us here, listening to this, we have instincts that draw us to these weird happenings, and the eccentric folk of the world that decide to spend their time reading them all. Yeah. I suppose it's our spice of life. It is for me. Case file number 440, written by Ornia 715. A case of the double aisles. My wife and daughter had the same glitch experience at the grocery store earlier today. We were sitting there eating, and she looked over at our son, saying that he looks different today. Said that people change over time, but is it possible that someone could see the moment that change happens? Then she kinda freaked out about a story she had to tell us. Wife and daughter were walking through a specific aisle, looking for a thing, realized it was in the next aisle, turned the corner and started walking down the next one, but instead restarted the aisle that they had just left from the beginning. Not like they turned around, but a full circle. They noticed right away, so they turned around and checked the aisle they just left to confirm what had happened, and it was a completely different aisle. She noticed a change in our son that I can't see after this weird glitch. Is it possible my wife just shifted realities? If so, what happened to my original wife? She seems exactly the same. From my wife's perspective, I was in a grocery store with my daughter doing some shopping. We went down the canned chili aisle. While walking by the chili to the left, I mentioned to my daughter that it was too bad that no one in the house liked chili dogs. She replied with, "Yuck, Mom, hot dogs are gross." I said, okay, well, we do need some canned corn, so I looked above the aisle to read the signs above. I noticed canned vegetables were in the next aisle to the right, so we walked, got to the end of the aisle, and turned right. Before we turned the corner to the aisle on the right, I looked down and saw the chili to the left. I stopped and said to my daughter, "Hey, weren't we just down the chili aisle?" My daughter said, "Whoa, Mom, yeah, we were." Now we were both standing outside the two aisles, looking back and forth between both aisles. I looked to the one on the right, the one we were just down, and saw baking goods like flour and things. We both kinda tripped out a bit, laughing, chalking it up to we must just be confused. I'm open-minded, but this definitely wouldn't be possible. We wrapped up our shopping and came home. Fast forward to dinner time, minus a few details. The long story short is that I noticed my son's features looking slightly different to me. I kept saying how he looked just slightly older. Kind of like when you send your kid to camp for a week, and when you see them, you notice how they aged just a wee bit from the last time you saw them. I asked my husband if he thought it possible for a person to notice the moment of the slightest aging in a child. We are pretty open-minded in our house and like to entertain conversations that don't fall in line with society's standards. It's fun, and we like to think for ourselves. At some point, a while later, my daughter said, "Hey Mom, tell them about what happened at the store." I told the story, and my husband, being my lovable weird self, said, "I think you experienced a glitch in the Matrix. Maybe my old wife is gone, and that's why our son looks different." I laughed it off because I like to always see the rational side to things, and also thought he was mostly joking, so he posted about it. I have no idea what really happened at the store. Had my daughter not been there to experience it with me, I might actually believe I in fact do have a mental illness like some of the commenters on my husband's posts think. I'm also a firm believer that this is how most of society is brainwashed to think. Oh hey, they are weird and losing their mind. Give them meds. Over the past 5 years, I've been on a journey of loosening the grip that society conditions us to have, and has on me, and trying to unlearn most of the things from my upbringings. I'm learning to think for myself and also try to realize that my life may not be what it seems to the next person. Perception is everything, and the experiences are different depending on who experiences them and how they vary. I'm not saying I shifted realities necessarily. I'm also not saying that I'm insane. There's no black and white. There's only what I experienced, and no one will see things the way I do. Maybe I will never know what truly happened, and that's part of life. Nothing has to have an answer. Not every situation out of the cookie-cutter life experience has to be labeled insane. I thank you all for the input on my husband's post. It certainly was a fun conversation to be part of. Case notes, file number 440. Right, so a quick note here, I definitely don't think you're insane. And the easiest way to prove that is just because your daughter was with you and she noticed the same thing. So it would have to be two people being mentally ill in the same way at the same time. Is that very likely? I don't think so. Even logically, you have to admit something was up, even if we don't know what it is. Bonus file, written by Cherry124. When my new man cave becomes haunted. A little backstory about the spare room. When I first bought my home last year, there was a family of around 13 people living in it, 6 of which were adults, 3 small bedrooms, and 1 sketchy annex in the garage. A year later, and the neighborhood is still telling me stories about how awful these people were as neighbors. The annex room was initially shoddy framing and drywall, presumably installed by that family. The walls were painted a weird green color, and the rug was a wrinkly stained mess. It became apparent that someone had been peeing in all 4 corners of the room. I figured it might just be pets, but there was a mirror that had, "Please help me," written on it in makeup, and the room locked from outside. The day we got our keys, I got called to respond to the Seattle riots with my National Guard unit and was gone for about a month. During that time, my wife and the in-laws began renovating the home to make it livable. I felt guilty being unable to help. My wife got together with my mom to convert that scary extra room into a man cave / jam room with all my music equipment and memorabilia. It came out really nice, but I haven't found much time to use it in the past year. A couple months ago, I built a gaming PC and decided to set it up in that room. Now that I've been going in there almost daily, things have started to feel a little strange around the house. I get the sensation someone is standing directly behind me once or twice a day in the room. Our TV set on fire in the living room a few weeks ago. Our water main burst last weekend, causing us to dig up our yard over the course of 3 days, and my garage lights keep turning on and off. I can hear the light switch. This morning, I got out of the shower to find that my wife had already left for work. I'm coming down the hall and I hear her clearly say, "Hey babe," from the spare room side of the house. I replied, "You're still here?" To which I got silence. I looked out the window and sure enough, her truck was gone. That's when I heard it again. "Babe, come here." I grabbed my things and noped to work. Anyway, when I was pulling out of the driveway, I could hear what sounded like a girl screaming from outside, followed by a bang. I stopped before backing into the street, thinking, was that my phone? I waited for a second before continuing on my way, thinking it might be the school across the street. I got about 50 feet down the road before I heard it again. This time it was faint, but sounded like it was coming from the car. I paused at the stop sign and rolled down the windows to see if it would happen again, as it had sounded identical to the first one. Nothing. I rolled up my windows and continued on my way to find that it happened several more times, almost like a recording. Same scream and bang over and over for another mile or so. Anyway, I'm weirded out for the day. Might sage later and bang some pants together, I don't know. Case file number 441, written by Formidable Ad 4125. The intensity of fear we all felt was unspeakable. My wife, sister, and I are all avid backpackers. We spend a lot of time in the outdoors, but back in 2018-ish, we decided to do pull-up camping with stargazing in Colorado as the main goal. We are from the Midwest. We used a light pollution map to find a remote camping area in San Juan National Forest and planned to hike during the day and stargaze at night. The first day and night, the stars and trails were amazing, and we were all super stoked to be in the mountains and away from flat land. It was the clearest I have ever seen the Milky Way galaxy, and it was phenomenal. After the first night, we all got up early and decided to do another hike, this time following a small dirt forest road through the mountains. We all were having a great time, and there was nothing but positive vibes. I mentioned that our hike felt more like a walk since we were on a road, so we all agreed to take the first proper trail we came across. We had a GPS unit, map, and compass, so we weren't worried about getting lost. We finally came across a trail that ran perpendicular to the road and had a slight gradient running down the mountain. Staying true to our word, we all agreed to see where it went and turned onto the trail. As soon as we left the road and stepped onto the trail, I had an unprovoked and overwhelming feeling of doom come over me. Suddenly, my excitement left me, and I felt almost instinctively that I would be in serious danger if I went down this trail. This unprovoked feeling of doom was strange enough, but when my sister said, "Guys, I don't think we should go down this trail," and my wife responded, "Oh my god, you feel that too?" I lost my crap. We quickly returned to the road and continued our walk. We all agreed we had the same unprovoked sensation once we stepped onto the trail and could not come up with any logical explanation. I have never experienced anything like this, and it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Case Notes, file number 441. What amazing vibes I get reading the first half of this. You know, my dream is eventually buying a little plot of land in a rural area, and in part making this choice based on a light pollution map. I've always lived in areas that had so much light pollution you could barely see any stars at all at night. This isn't helped by my visual snow. However, I used to go fishing with my dad all the time up in James Bay, Canada. There'd be areas where it almost seemed like you would witness the very edges of the universe when stargazing. There's a sublime connection to the universe one feels when they're able to see the sky as intended, completely unobstructed. Anyhow, about the glitch, what sells it for me is that your whole group experienced the same palpable level of fear as each other. I could buy the explanation that one of you just had a keen intuitive sense. Maybe somehow your subconscious processed an inaudible noise leading you to believe there's a wild animal down that path, something like that. But all of you, simultaneously? Strikes me as more than raw mundane instinct. Bonus file, written by Sinlock. Even ghosts would do with a home renovation. I'm currently a 50-year-old male living in Greenville, South Carolina, and my first paranormal experience occurred back when I was in middle school. I had an uncle named Eddie who bought and restored historic houses, essentially a high-end flipper before we all knew what the hell that was. He purchased a house that was in a historic area of Earl Street here in Greenville. I don't remember the exact street, but it was definitely in that area, and he invited my grandfather over to look at some of the work he was doing. My papa was a carpenter, and I routinely tagged along just to get to spend time with him and watch him work. We got there and got the grand tour, and were told that an elderly woman had lived there and was heating her upstairs bedroom with a kerosene heater of some sort. The fumes from the heater suffocated her, and she ended up dead and wasn't found for a good while. My uncle bought the house at an estate auction because the family was unwilling to deal with the aftermath of that, and he set about working to get it in shape to resell. After Uncle Eddie gave us a tour and talked about what he was wanting done, he asked if we were hungry and offered to run and grab some burgers for us while Papa figured out what he'd need in order to do the work necessary. We gave him our order and Uncle Eddie took off for food, so it was just Papa and myself left in the house. Nothing really spooky happened right off, and from what I remember there were no vibes to the place, so Papa did what he needed to do while Uncle Eddie was gone, and then we popped a squat on the stairs and started killing time until the food arrived. About 5 minutes after we settled on the stairs, we both started hearing what sounded like footsteps at the top of the stairs walking back and forth along the hall. Then we heard what sounded like a door open and close. Figuring someone else had to be there, we went upstairs and, to our surprise, found no one else there. We were 100% alone in that house. Rattled, we sat back down on the stairs and waited to see if we heard it again. And it didn't take long before we definitely heard the sound of someone walking around upstairs. There was no denying it was footsteps on the second floor. Then we heard the stairs creaking as if someone was coming down the steps. Only we were sitting on them looking straight up the staircase, and there was absolutely no one there. The footsteps continued down the stairs very slowly, and both of us were too stunned to even move. I remember feeling like I couldn't move at all, but I think that was due to the fear and not whatever was going on around us. I don't feel like anything was making me stay where I was. There was no force acting on me. I was just too freaked to process anything other than hearing this invisible person slowly coming down the stairs. The footsteps walked past us, even making the step we were sitting on creak as it went by. Then it walked into the foyer of the house and ceased entirely. At this point, we both decided we weren't really feeling this ghost house crap and left to go sit in Papa's truck until Eddie returned. We of course told Eddie about what had happened, and we were surprised when he said that he'd heard noises and footsteps in the house too, but it wasn't going to stop him from finishing up the work and selling the house. That's someone else's problem, he laughed, and then asked my Papa if he was able to do what he needed done inside. Papa declined politely, and after some nervous laughter, we left. Eddie's wife ended up falling in love with the house, and he renovated it for her, and they lived up there until his death about 15 years ago. So I guess whatever that was ended up actually being his problem after all. Bonus file, written by Wonderlash. My newborn son, triggering supernatural forces? I know this is going to sound stupid. Please know that I'm a very rational person, but weird things happen sometimes that I can't explain. Something strange happened last night, and I remember something very similar happened when I had my firstborn 4 years ago, which I had forgotten about. I've lived in my current house for 10 years, and nothing eventful happened until my first baby was born. Nothing major, just a feeling of being watched, the sounds of footsteps upstairs, etc. Very subtle things, but noticeable. I'd also wake up and see what I can only describe as an electric man in my room, that I would see for a few seconds, and then it would be gone. I put that down to dreaming. When my boy reached about 10 months, it stopped and things returned to normal. My second baby is a week old. Last night, I was sitting in my bedroom with my newborn, feeding him before I went to sleep, when the nightlight down the hall in my oldest son's room turned off. 3 seconds later, I could hear a voice say something that wasn't my son's. I crapped myself and got my son out of the room and had him sleep in the bed with me. I happened to mention this to my partner today, and he said that's really weird because he slept in there for part of the night last night. No room in the big bed with all 3 of us in there, so he left our bed in the early hours and had terrible nightmares which he doesn't usually have. Is this a thing? New baby triggers weird stuff happening in people's houses? I also remember being on the phone to my mother last year talking about something that was really stressful. The conversation was so tense that I didn't notice the banging upstairs until it got really loud and shook my chandelier hanging in the living room. I got halfway up the stairs when a door slammed, so I grabbed my son and ran next door. I asked my neighbor to come back into the house with me while I checked upstairs. Nothing there and no windows open. My neighbor said he had been hearing banging for the last 10 minutes coming from my house and was wondering what it was. I was so preoccupied on the phone to my mom that I didn't notice it until it was really loud. Anyone else have something similar? Update. My partner and I were in the kitchen making food last night when my toy car rolled across the rug and onto the wooden floor in the adjoining living room. My son was in bed and nobody was in the living room at the time. Here we go. Case file number 442, written by Wyatt Montgomery. A case of the sun rising, and then rising again. 2 sunsets and a person I've yet to see again. So to start, I like to believe that I'm not a skeptic in any regard, but I just don't know what to make of this. I'm trying to pretend I was just tired, but I don't know how to explain it. A few weeks ago, I couldn't sleep, so at about 4 a.m., I went to the studio I take a class in for college to get some work done. While there was one other person there who introduced himself as Peter. I don't feel bad using his real name because as far as I can tell, he doesn't exist. I said hi, we chatted while I worked. Nice guy. I watched the sunrise. He said he had to get back to work, on the other side of the building, separate studio, but I walked past it on my way in. And I said okay, he waved. He took a few steps away and said, "Weird, isn't it?" I think he wasn't facing me. And since I'm bad at hearing, I assumed I misheard him and just nodded. I swear, 20 minutes after the sun was all but fully in the sky, which I know because the section outside the building is very pretty. But without me realizing it, it was rising. Again. The sky had gone back to dark and the sun was cresting again. I went down and told Peter, and he found it funny. I've looked for him on my way in every day since then, since I saw where he sat. Someone else sits there, and I don't know them well enough to ask, but I don't see him anywhere there. Say what you might, but I have no clue where else to talk about it. Case file number 443, written by Beatrice. The secrets of a woman aging 28 years in the blink of an eye. One day at the beginning of this year, me, 26 female, and my boyfriend, 26 male, went for a big walk around the town we were living in at the time. It was the middle of the day, probably around 2 p.m., and we were both completely sober. At one point, we were on the side of the road, on one of those lanes where people run and walk. Apologies, I don't know the proper name for those. And we saw a female child, around 12 years old if I had to guess, jogging. She was in our lane, coming our way. I remember finding it strange for a child to be jogging on her own. There was no one else around, and it was a pretty remote area, like a countryside road, but I didn't mention anything to my boyfriend. We were walking side by side, so I walked behind him so she could pass. I stopped seeing her for a few seconds, and when I saw her again next to me, she was a fully grown woman in her mid-40s. He immediately looks at me in shock and asks, "Did you see that?" I asked him if he had also seen a child turn into a woman, and he said yes. He said she never really left his sight, but as he blinked and looked again, she was no longer a child. We even looked back to confirm, and she was still the mid-40s woman. Since then, I've been noticing other smaller glitches. I don't know if they were always there and I just didn't pay attention, or if that started a whole chain of events. Case file number 444, written by Friendly Demonic. The secrets of my son's soul. The first time this happened was when he was 3. My older sister was staying in my apartment and watching TV in her room when my son walked in. She asked him if he wanted to watch cartoons and put some on for him. He just sat quietly at the end of her bed while she tried to get his attention. Then she hears him laugh in the other room with me. When she looked at the bedroom door, the copy of my son disappeared. When she told me this, I assumed she was high and imagined it. Second time, a friend visiting from the UK got up at night to use the restroom and saw my son's door was wide open, lights on, and he was sitting at his little table with a friend. He told me about this in the morning, since it was 3 a.m. and kinda weird. My son wasn't in his room that night, and no other children were present. I rationalized it as he was tired and imagined it. Third time was when my son was around 8. My best friend and roommate, new apartment, different state, got up to go to the bathroom. The hall light was off and it was dark, but she saw my son standing in the hall next to her. She told him to go back to bed and stepped into the bathroom. She then sees him in the mirror, standing behind her, and tells him to stop and to go to bed. My son then turns around and walks away. That's when she realized something was wrong and looked back into the hall, but he wasn't there. She went to his room and he was still asleep. She ran to my room to tell me, and for the first time I thought, okay, there seems to be a pattern here. Maybe there is something going on. The last time was when my son was 15. This time I saw it. I was in bed, depressed and tired after having had a miscarriage. I woke up to my son curled up in bed next to me. I thought he was trying to comfort me, which was sweet. I sang a lullaby to him and petted his hair before it clicked. My son is 15 now. This was him at age 7 or 8. I froze and asked who he was. He told me everything was gonna be okay, then got up and left. Everyone assumed it was blood loss that made me hallucinate, but I was wide awake. No one has seen my son's double in 5 years, but it's weird as hell. Case notes, file number 443. First off, I'm terribly sorry for your miscarriage. I couldn't even imagine the sorrow that would bring. But at least you do have a son who's already a teenager. I also can't imagine how that would feel, but of course in a positive way. So I've been looking into astral projection more since so many glitches seem to involve it these days. It seems to be accelerating in frequency. One key point, however, is that it's typically described as being a voluntary process, a conscious process. But in most of the glitches I've read, it's accidental, often with the originating person not even being aware they did it. This makes me wonder if there's some environmental trigger that can activate the latent ability in people. Clearly it doesn't happen to everyone in the area, and it's very infrequent even for those it does happen to. If I had to guess a trigger, it'd be some sort of frequency in the vicinity of the original person, which triggers their brain to activate the ability they may not even be aware they have. Perhaps this frequency could even be imagined by the host, for instance while dreaming. That could explain why it often happens when they're sleeping. Bonus file, written by Nice Bloke, Kek V. The Secrets of a Great Landlord. The second flat I ever rented was in Camberwell, London. It's a low-rise block, probably 1960s, and I was living there on my own. Now, a few things happened during the first few months of my stay. I'd come home from work and a few kitchen unit cupboards would be open. No biggie. Can I be sure I closed all the cupboards at 7:30 a.m. this morning after I rushed for breakfast? Not really. This happened more than a few times. Then I came home to my breakfast bowl smashed in the middle of the kitchen floor. Pretty sure I left it on the side where it wouldn't fall off, but again, it fell off, so maybe I didn't. Turning point for me was one night, whilst fast asleep, my bedroom door slammed shut very loudly. Now, I always sleep with my door an inch or two open, and I know doors can close on their own, but this must have had some good force behind it. Anyway, I decided to put my four-legged chair up against the handle of my bedroom door. It wouldn't have worked if you were to move the handle as the chair wasn't high enough, but it made me feel better. I woke up minutes before my alarm usually to find the chair facing the opposite way around, the back facing away from the door. Now maybe I did some sleepwalking, maybe I did, but that was enough for me. I packed a bag, grabbed my wallet and keys, and while still in my dressing gown, drove to my parents'. I informed my landlord that I was moving out immediately. Keep the deposit, I'm out. I think the place is haunted and I'm a wimp to that sort of thing. He laughed. Funny enough, he said, you're not the first person to say that. I'll give you your deposit back. Case notes, bonus file. Right, not much to say here, another haunted house, which is creepy in and of itself. But what's really weird is that your landlord was so damn cool. I think that's the real mystery here. How the hell did you find such a good landlord? Let us know. Oh, and also, that you got out immediately. Smart move. Case file number 445, written by Doctors 12345. The chilling secrets of a sound only I can hear. So, earlier this year, my family and I went to my mom's hometown for a holiday. We live in a different country now, and it's a really nice getaway. When something strange started happening. We stayed at the house my mom grew up in, which has quite a big front garden and a massive back garden, like most people in that area do. When you go to the back garden, you have the neighbors' gardens on the left and right, and at the back, there's an area which, if I understood correctly, people share and use for their cows and horses. Behind this shared area, there's a massive forest. Opposite the front of the house, there's a road, which is just outside the house, and on the other side of the road, there's lots of hills, with many private areas which are mainly used for animals and living. Anyway, we were there for just over 2 weeks, most of which we spent at the house due to the isolation rules. We mainly spent this time outside, either playing or cleaning the garden, cutting the grass, chopping down the old tree branches, etc. Every now and then I would hear this really weird noise. The best way I can describe it is a human laugh mixed with a dog's or wolf's howl. It would last for 2 to 3 seconds before stopping. Sometimes it would be about 5 of these laughs in a row. Sometimes it was only 1. To make it even weirder, it was quite loud, but it sounded like it was coming from far away. However, everything echoed if it was loud. Everything from a person shouting to an ambulance's sirens and train siren, is that how you call it, would echo. So the sound had to be coming from nearby, and yet it sounded like it came from so far away. The thing is, it looked like I was the only one reacting to the sound in any way for the first couple of days. So I asked my mom if she heard the sound too, and she said she didn't, but it was probably some sort of animal. So I kept an eye out over the next few days to see if I could spot it, However, all I could see was cows, horses, sheep, goats, chickens, and pigs, none of which could make that sound. The sound kept happening very randomly and irregularly over the duration of our stay, and for a long time it seemed like I was the only one hearing it, until I realized my brother was reacting to it as well. I asked him what he was reacting to, and he described the same sound I was hearing. Okay, now the light. The toilet is actually outside, even though we are currently renovating the house and started building a toilet inside, and I needed to go one night, so I grabbed a torch and out I went. As I look up at the sky, I see this light, the size of a big star, but it was L-shaped. I thought I was half asleep, so I ignored it. So I went to the toilet, did my business, then started walking back towards the house. I stopped to look back at the place where the star was, and now it looked like a square U, sort of like an L and an inverted L right next to it. As I was wondering what it could be, I heard the laughter again. I pointed the torch towards where I thought it came from, but then it started coming from all around me. Call me what you want, but I got so scared I just sprinted to the house. But yeah, this is it. What the hell was that? Case file number 446, written by Eyebrows Where? The Mystery of the Immortal Jack Miller. Through all of middle school, there was a kid in my grade named Jack Miller. Jack was your typical high school nerd stereotype. Rectangular glasses, acne, shaggy brown hair, a small circle of similar friends who he primarily hung around. You get the picture. One particular thing about him is that he always wore sweatpants. Some kids actually had made fun of him for it because he would always, every day of middle school, come to school wearing those loose-fitting, straight-leg sweatpants you often see kids wearing. These are important details for later. One day, during the summer after 8th grade, all the parents of kids in my grade got an email stating that Jack Miller had tragically passed away in an accident. Naturally, my parents, and presumably many other parents in town, sat down with their kids and informed us all of what had happened, and why our classmate would not be returning to school in September. Being as though this was during the early days of Facebook, a myriad of RIP Jack Miller posts started to circle our community's Facebook page. Parents, teachers, classmates of his all posted about what a tragedy it was and how he would be so dearly missed and whatnot. I myself had a friend whose mom was close friends with and worked with Jack's mom in the same hospital, and we all got the grisly details of what exactly happened to him. This happened as a result of my friend picking up the second landline in her house one day and overhearing a conversation between her mom and Jack's mom. It was terrible, and all of my classmates felt so bad for his sister, who was a few grades below us, and the rest of his family. Fast forward to September of 9th grade. The sun is shining, girls are getting dress coded for their off-the-shoulder tops, freshmen such as myself are struggling to figure out how to open their lockers, etc. I'm sitting in the homeroom waiting for my name to be called when all of a sudden the teacher reads from her roster. Jack Miller. I sit up in my seat, confused, and look around the room to find many other confused faces. The girl next to me whispers, "I thought he died in August." And I reply, "I know, what the—" "Here," says a voice from the back row. I turned around in utter shock and confusion because right there, sitting 2 rows from the left back row, was Jack. Many other kids did the exact same thing, and after a few seconds, nearly every eye in the room was pointed at a kid who responds to the name Jack, who had shaggy brown hair, rectangular glasses, acne, who was also wearing a pair of ill-fitting sweatpants. He looked identical to Jack Miller and was even wearing the iconic sweatpants we had all known Jack to wear every day. He looked confused as to why everyone was looking at him. The teacher went on, reading names from the roster, looking visibly confused herself. Eventually, lunch came around, and I saw that many of my classmates had sought out this Jack Miller and were bombarding him with questions. "We all thought you died. What the hell? How are you here right now? You're dead. Why is your last name different than last year?" Jack Miller responded to these questions with the following explanation. He said, "I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I just transferred here because my parents and I moved here from XYZ town, about 20 minutes away. My name's always been Jack Miller, and I'm not sure what you're talking about or why everyone's acting so weird. I'm alive and standing here right now, of course." Eventually, this had become such an odd, talked about phenomenon that the principal stepped in a few days later and addressed our grade in an assembly. The abridged version of what he said was, "I know a lot of you are confused about our new student, Jack Miller, because of what happened in August. Jack Miller passed away in an accident over the summer, and we just so happen to have a new student here this year with a very similar name and similar appearance. I don't want any more talk about this matter, as it is settled." So basically, the principal had told us all that it was just some wild coincidence that this new kid looks exactly like the kid who died, who some of my classmates had spent grades K through 8 with every day. Something just didn't add up though. This new Jack looked exactly like the other one. If he wasn't the same person, then he was a spot-on doppelganger of the original Jack, down to minor details like the shape of his glasses, acne, hair color, clothes, and overall appearance. They were even the same height, for Christ's sake. I changed the names for privacy, but in real life, this new kid had the exact same first name, and his last name was literally one letter off from the original kid. So life went on as normal, but all these years later, I still find myself wondering what the hell that was all about, and what a major coincidence it would have been for this to happen. Any thoughts are appreciated on this matter, but I believe that somehow, some wires had to have been crossed in the universe to result in this humongous coincidence. Answering a few questions. Yes, Jack Miller's obituary is online. I just looked it up, and the date of his death was back when I was in 8th, going into 9th grade. No, I will not be sharing the details of his death because of the disturbing nature of how he died, and out of respect for his family. Just know it's one of the worst, most humiliating ways to die and be remembered by. I have heard/thought about his death being faked for whatever reason, then him just returning to school as normal. One of you said it would be the worst witness protection program in history, which is funny, but the facts are that Jack Miller died when I was in middle school, and Jack Miller is a very real person who exists and is alive. I just looked up his Facebook page and he's still active on it. I was able to find pictures of both Jacks. One picture is from Jack Miller's obituary, the other is from Jack Miller's Facebook page, but his earliest picture on there is from when we graduated high school. That being said, Jack Miller just looks like how Jack Miller would have grown up to look. They have near identical features. Their real first name is much less common than Jack. It's a name I've only heard a few times, and I've only ever met these two people with that name in my life. So that was another reason why it was so weird. Case file number 447, written by Anonymous. Mystery of coordinated teeth brushing. So this happened a few years ago. I'm in college now. I still think back on it and laugh because of how weird the situation was. I got my license when I was a senior in high school, a lot later than my peers, because I had crazy anxiety and driving made it worse, and I hated showing up to school sweaty. Eventually I had to get it because I would stay later after school and my mom didn't want to drive to pick up my sister, then me later in 2 separate trips. This particular day, I was driving to school alone for the first time because I had stayed home from school until after lunch at about 2 p.m. due to a doctor's appointment. It usually took me about 10 to 15-ish minutes from my house to school, depending on traffic, and on the way there were a couple of 4-way stop sign intersections and light intersections. When I pulled up to the first 4-way stop intersection, a car coming from the left stop sign passed in front of me, and the man driving the car was straight up brushing his teeth with a large white electric toothbrush. I thought this was hilarious looking, and I remembered it because I could tell I had the same toothbrush even from far away. I was just so familiar with it. It was so funny at the time because I grew up watching Mr. Bean, and I remember an episode where he brushed his teeth in the car. I continued to drive to school and came up to the final stoplight intersection where I had a red light. That's when I saw a man driving his car coming from the right through his green light. Completely different person and different car. And he too was brushing his teeth with a big white electric toothbrush. I remember shrieking in my car alone because I was so stunned that I saw 2 people within the span of 5 minutes, both brushing their teeth in their cars. When I finally pulled into the school parking lot, I parked in the back row where all of my friends would park. We were all usually late, so ended up there. And I pulled my car into a spot right next to my best friend, who was sitting in his car. And when I put my car in park and looked over at him, he was sitting there brushing his teeth. Mind you, it wasn't an electric toothbrush this time, but still I was sent into oblivion by seeing him there. when he should have been in class, but instead was brushing his teeth. I remember telling people about it for the rest of the day, and after I got home, no one really seemed to believe me or care that that had happened, but I think about it all the time, and it was just such an odd time of day for it to be happening too, that it always stuck with me. Case notes, case file number 447. So this is either the universe's or developer's way of reminding you to keep up to date with your own hygienic routine, or it's subtle evidence that you are in fact in your own version of the Truman Show. The good news is, everyone in your show has excellent breath and beautiful pearly whites. Silver linings, right? Case file number 448, written by Jarvie Scott. The Mystery of Silent, Simultaneous Observance. This happened a couple years ago in Chicago when I was just out of college. I was riding the train to work. Since it was early morning, the train was relatively packed. On the seat by the train door sits this old black man with a cane. He was decently dressed up in slacks and a suit vest. We reach a stop and he gets up to get off the train. Since he's older, he's slow to move and has a bit of a limp. As soon as he gets out of my sight, this different old black man with a cane, also dressed up in slacks and a suit vest, and with a similar limp, comes in and sits in the exact same spot. Now, important to note, they did not look exactly the same or have the same exact clothes, just similar overall. Since he clearly wasn't the same man, I find it somewhat funny, but don't think much of it. That is, until I looked around at the rest of the train. My entire section of the train was just staring at me in silence. My heart skipped a beat hard when I noticed that. It lasted until the door's closing announcer made a comment, and then people went back to their business. Not the most insane story, but it freaked me the hell out. Case file number 449, written by Cat Forever Roars. Secrets of a Universe I Don't Belong In. To get this story started, I'll have to jump back in time, around 2015 to 2016. I was getting ready to go out with my mother and my grandmother to go to Hobby Lobby, and for those of you who don't know what Hobby Lobby is, it's a store that is full of art, craft items, candles, etc. It's like a Walmart for crafts and art. Anyhow, after I was done getting ready, I sat in my room playing with my parakeet because I had some time to spare. A bit of time had passed and my mother, whom I told to get me when she was ready to go, hadn't come to get me. I walked out into the living room and she was flabbergasted by my appearance. Not because of the way I was dressed, but because I had come out of my room. My mother claimed to have come into my room and said the lights were off. She had checked all around for me and assumed I went to my grandma's. She lives right behind my mom's house. I told her that I was in my room the entire time, and we both felt strange after that. Now, before this entire incident, my mother was very liberal, as well as a few of my other family members. A bit of time passed, and when I woke up one day, everything changed. My grandma, who was strictly against tattoos and dyed hair, began doing so herself. She got a tattoo and dyed her hair pink. I was highly confused and brushed it off as a change of heart. That was until my mother became this kind of hardcore conservative overnight. It was all weird. My other grandmother, who didn't like tattoos, got one too. Everything that I grew up with just changed. Little by little, I've been noticing more differences in my family from what I had grown up with. I kept trying to make excuses for it, but nothing was fitting right. I'm still stuck here in this universe that doesn't feel like my own. I've always been spiritual in the sense that spirits are attracted to me, and I connect with my third eye often. I don't know what to do, and I've read theories that once you hop, you can't go back to where you're from. And this isn't like a political issue. I'm not mad that my mother is conservative or whatever. It's just totally different from the mom I grew up with. Things have gotten weird. Some of my lifelong wishes have come true, but nothing feels right. Ever since I've realized all of this, my brain has gotten strange. I suffer from bouts of disassociation, which at first I thought could have been seizures, except my soul feels like it's floating above my body. Nothing feels like it belongs to me anymore. My body feels foreign often. It feels as though my soul is trying to connect with a body that never belonged to it. I know I kinda sound crazy, but I'm saying this with 100% honesty from my side. I was going to try to make a video, but I don't want to upset my family or scare them by making them think I don't care about them. I tried to make this new life work for me, but nothing is helping, and how could it? Does anyone know what I can do to adjust? I have memories that nobody in my family remembers, and I tried going to doctors who say I should get a brain scan and tests, but I can't afford that right now. They say I'm coherent enough to pass the test, but don't know why I'm having these episodes of disassociation and minor brain seizures. I really believe this isn't my world. Those close to me can vouch for me. If anyone has any sort of idea what this is, please, I'm willing to hear it. All I know is that doctors are puzzled, I'm puzzled, and nobody besides my boyfriend and closest friends know about this. Someone asked me if any major events happened in 2016, and I forgot to mention it. The same year I experienced an overdose, I was 16 or almost 17 at the time. I experienced the void, a true black nothingness. I can't recall if it happened before or after the room incident stated above, so I can't say what is truly the cause for this glitch. This happened 3 years ago, and since then I have undergone extreme life changes that never seemed reasonable or even possible for that matter. I'm 22 now, and still to this day believe I'm not in my world anymore. My life has 180'd, starting in 2016. People I'm very close to have forgotten past major events or conversations between us. I'm living the life of another version of me. I don't belong here, and honestly I'm just living day by day. The only reason I am back here, updating this, is because of the situation I encountered 2 days ago, which I have proof of. This recollection was told on a channel, and I had been telling my closest friend that I wanted proof that glitches exist just before I heard my story being told to me through my headphones. I messaged my mom immediately and told her, I wrote about our portal encounter and just heard it on YouTube for the very first time. She messaged me back just moments later, freaking out that she was watching a paranormal show, and at the very second I messaged her, they were talking about portals. Either that is one of the biggest coincidences in human history, or there's something going on here. Case file number 450, written by Cynthia, 2049. The secrets of this bike trail doubling a man. I live in a major city, and when it was warm out, I liked to bike back to my parents' home in the suburbs. A 36-mile bike ride. The journey is actually very simple. Half is on this one long stretch of urban road. The other half is part of a forest preserve bike path. The entire journey is going southbound. When I got to the second half, the forest preserve, right at the beginning I saw an old man on a bike playing old-timey music on a speaker. He rode past me in the opposite direction, going north. He was going slow, just strolling, so it's obvious he wasn't doing any fast or long-distance biking, especially given his bike wasn't one made for that. I thought nothing of it until I'm at the very end of the path, around 14 miles away from the start, and the same guy rode past me going in the opposite direction again, going north. At no point in my journey did I ever see him pass me going the same way as me, so he didn't do a loop of the path on his bike, especially since this path is just a single trail, it doesn't loop around at any point. I enjoy weird glitches like this, so honestly I just laughed and kept on writing, but it doesn't have any clear explanation to me. Case file number 451, written by Sleep Devil 2. The secrets of a sound that has no discernible source. Ever since I was little, I would randomly hear this chiming sound. It's probably 3 notes, A, B, C, and DB, played in that order and like a pedal was pressed. It's like a wind bell, a bottle being blown or something similar, and it's fairly high sounding. I think it's a bit more long and has more notes, and I'm not sure those are even the notes I keep hearing, but that's to give you an idea of what I'm trying to describe. It happens randomly. There can be a few days to years in between it, and it doesn't matter where I am, whether I have any electronics near or on me, who I'm with, what the weather is like, etc. There are no variables that consistently connect with this. I would consider it to be some kind of brain fart or even an auditory hallucination, if it wasn't for my current boyfriend, my parents, and maybe even some friends hearing it too. For all I know, it only happens if they're with me. It's been gnawing away at me since. I can't ever seem to pinpoint where it comes from and why it happens. Has anyone here heard of something similar? Case notes, file number 451. Right, not long on this, I would just say that there is another, maybe you could call it a glitch, but it's called the hum. It's where people hear this very low frequency humming sound, like but only a certain amount of people can hear it, and it is tied to certain locations. They don't know what is causing it, and I think they even tried to measure it, and they weren't able to. Bonus file, written by Yeeting Slamage. The Secrets of My Great-Grandfather Reanimated. I was 7 years old and at a funeral, my grandfather's to be exact. I saw a strange man hanging out in the back of the funeral home just watching everyone. He had a very distinct black suit with a nice pair of polished brown shoes and curly red hair. At one point I was back there near him, sitting on a pew, and he told me he knew my grandfather very well and couldn't wait to see him again. I remember he had a sort of pale look to him, like he was sick or something. Could have been the lighting, however. I told him something along the lines of me too, and that I really missed him. I can't remember exactly because of how young I was. It was weird because this man couldn't have been older than 40, and my grandfather was 90 when he died. He patted me on the shoulder, then turned and walked into the hall of the funeral home. I remember his hands were ice cold as his pinky grazed my neck as he patted me. I told my grandma and mom about him, and when we got home, she whipped out the photo album and asked if I could point out the man. There was an old grainy photo from their wedding day, and there he was in the same suit and everything. Turns out that man was my grandfather's father, who had died 45 years earlier. I never saw him again, and I get chills thinking about it to this day. I never saw him before in a picture or anything. My grandma, Lorene, nearly fainted when I pointed out the man who had talked to me. She was the only one who believed me, and to this day, my parents think I was playing a joke. Case notes, bonus file. In most theologies, there's a theory of the afterlife, be it in the Christian's heaven, the Egyptian's kingdom of the dead, and fields of Aru, where your heart, embodying the soul, was weighed in balance in worthiness. Or the Greeks, the Romans, the Norse, all religions have slight variations, but a theme is constant. Our actions in life determine where we end up after our lives in this mortal coil come to an end. But I also wonder if we're able to refuse judgment entirely. If any of these afterlife theories prove true, my gut says that free will would still apply. I think that one could choose to remain behind, to observe the happenings of the world and the people in it. I think especially for those with potent bonds to those still alive, this would be a frequent choice. Of course, an eternity spent without stimulation beyond the visual. I think that would drive any conscious entity to insanity. However the system is designed, I'm happy you were able to interact with your great-grandfather in a peaceful way. Case file number 452, written by Momo Moments. Secrets of My Mom and I confusing 7 a.m. for 4 a.m. This happened when I was 16. My mother used to take my phone at night and then give it back to me when she woke me up for school the following morning. Every morning started the same. She would wake me up, I would go to the bathroom to take a shower and get ready. I'd come out and put on my uniform, she'd give me breakfast, and then I'd run out of the house to catch the public bus. This is the important part. I would always take my phone in the bathroom with me. I'm the type of person who plans my day by the minutes. I knew I had to take my shower for X amount of minutes, get out of the bathroom by X, leave the house at X to catch the bus. So, the same routine, I was in the bathroom and I remember it so clearly. My shower took way longer than usual, and instead of it being 7:15, the phone said 7:23. I remember rushing out of the bathroom as I was supposed to leave the house by 7:25 most days. I rushed and put on my uniform, and my mom followed me half out of the house with breakfast. I distinctly remember checking the clock before I left too, trying to figure out if I had the time to catch the bus or if I had to take a car to school. The clock was 7:28. I had time to catch the bus. It was a snowy day in January. I also remember that part vividly. The sky was gray and dark, but that's how it was every day. The streets were eerily empty. I stood at my bus stop, which was on the side of a pretty busy street. Not today. No one was on the street. Maybe a car passed by once every few minutes. I started getting worried that I'd be late for school. That's when I looked down at my phone to call my dad to drop me off at school. It was 4:03 a.m. I was shocked. It couldn't be. I walked back home and my mom was still up, getting my other sister ready for school. She was surprised to see me. I told her to check the time, and to her surprise, it was 4 a.m. She started saying how she swore her alarm woke her up at 7. Like it does every single morning, and we both looked at each other and swore we saw the time. A 4 a.m. snowy day and a 7 a.m. snowy day looked the same outside, but I knew I checked the clock enough times to confirm it was 7 a.m. Regardless, we all went back to sleep, and I again woke up at 7. This time I made my dad take me to school, and the whole day I had my eyes on the clock. This incident never happened to me again, but I still have no explanation for it. Bonus file, written by Bitch War only. Secrets of a voice yelling, "Go away." My uncle's house was constructed from zero, but the place where it is had been abandoned for a long time before he started building. I have so many stories from there that, to me, prove it is indeed haunted, but I'll begin with the oldest one I can remember, before there even was a house there. Right next to the house, there's a kindergarten. I studied there when I was a kid, just like my mom and her brothers before me. There was always a playground legend about a man in a military uniform who called the kids to go behind the school, and then they disappeared. Even as a kid, I remember being so afraid of going to that particular place behind the school, but as I grew up, I stopped thinking about it. Fast forward a few years, and my uncle's house had just been finished. One night, when I was out doing laundry with my cousin, I decided I wanted to see the kindergarten from above, as it had been years since I saw it on the inside. So we went to the balcony, and I got a really good view of the place. After a few seconds, I noticed someone walking in between the classrooms and to the back of the school. I couldn't see their faces, but my whole body tensed as I saw the shadow go through the wall and then disappear behind the school. I remembered the story from my childhood and still wonder if that is the same man the kids saw back then. The second story. Most of my paranormal experiences I've had have been with said cousin I mentioned earlier, so I do believe her when it comes to paranormal things she's told me that happened in my uncle's house. One of the scariest ones for her was a time when she had just come home from school and wanted to ask her aunt, let's call her Sarah, if they were going to eat at her grandparents' house or if they would be staying there. So she goes to the bottom of the stairs and yells, "Aunt Sarah, are you here?" To which Sarah's voice responded, "Yes." Then my cousin yelled again, "Are we gonna go to Grandma's?" But no one answered after that. After a few minutes without a response, my cousin went to the second floor and started looking for Sarah, but there was absolutely no one there, not a single person. She then called her on her phone, only to find out that they had all gone to her grandparents' house and were waiting for her to go as well. She ran out of there and didn't come back for weeks as she was too afraid of the voice she heard. I wasn't present when this happened, but it's important to the next story, where I was present. After those, a bunch of other paranormal things happened to her and our family too. They decided they would call a priest to bless the house and invited everyone to pray and later hang out with them. My whole family was there, 20 plus people in the backyard as the priest blessed the house. We were all praying and singing, happy, united, when suddenly, just as the priest was going to climb the stairs to the second floor, a loud voice sounded, as if it was coming from where we were standing, and it said, "Go away." My 14-year-old self was shaking with fear, but the lady that was directing the prayer yelled at us to pray louder and take each other's hands. A lot of people were crying with horror at what we had just witnessed. That has to be one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, and for that I'm convinced that there is something horrible hiding in my uncle's house. Bonus file, written by Nut Bastard. Secrets of a ghost terrifyingly picking you up. I was probably 5 or so. My brother was 7. We shared a room, 2 twin mattresses just on the floor. We both saw a misty figure come through the south wall of the room. It wasn't human in shape, but it also wasn't a typical spooky ghost. We were both scared and didn't know what was happening. The ghost grabbed hold of me and lifted me into the air. My brother grabbed my leg, trying to keep me from being taken. The ghost was taking me up and we moved towards the west wall. At this point, I was about 5 feet in the air. My brother was still hanging onto my leg, and we were both hysterical. As the ghost passed through the west wall, I did not, and me and my brother dropped to the floor. With all the noise we made, and the two of us hitting the floor, our dad stormed in and started yelling at us. We tried to explain, but he didn't believe us. My brother and I didn't talk about it for 20 years, but when it came up, we both had the exact same sequence of events, finishing each other's sentences. I know memory is a fickle thing at best, but we both remember it. I remember having the wind knocked out of me when I hit the ground. I remember being picked up, and my brother tugging on my leg, and us both falling when the ghost passed through the wall. Case file number 453, written by a girl. Secrets of Déjà Vu on steroids. Okay, so I, 22 female, was selected to go on a study tour across my country. It was me with 3 other students from my university, whom I had never spoken to before. One of them, 21 male, was physically impaired. He lost one of his hands in an accident a few years ago. Anyway, we went on this trip. It was fun. The friend and I got a lot closer. Cut to the last day of the trip. We were visiting a mall to kill some time. I was conversing with him and asked him if he had ever experienced phantom hand pain. I wanted to know if that was a thing. That's when I felt it. It wasn't just a déjà vu. It was as if I had this exact same conversation before. I knew what he was going to say next. I asked him the questions and I already knew his answers, word for word. I've never met the person before. I've never asked that question to anyone else. I've never been to that place before in my life. So I know it wasn't a memory. I don't know what it was, but it was very unsettling. I kept thinking to myself, how is this even happening? I've experienced a lot of déjà vus before, but never like this. It really freaked me out. Case notes, file number 453. I've had déjà vus in my life too, of course. I think we've all had that sensation that this has already happened before. It's said to be caused by a slight delay in your brain's processing centers. Keep in mind that as we observe reality, our brain is doing all kinds of funky trickery to make it all sync up, but the stimuli isn't all entering our brains or processing at the same speed. For instance, it takes a lot longer for light to enter your brain and be processed into a coherent image than it does for your brain to decode noise. Actually, that's why people's reaction times for auditory stimuli are so much faster than by sight. More than twice as fast if I recall. But it all feels instantaneous and synced up because of our brain's magic. Now this does help to explain general déjà vu, but knowing and being able to predict an entire conversation, well, that's evidence of a server loop or something right there. Much more than just processing delays. Bonus file, written by Deku Scrubber. Secrets of Pizza, an Angel, and a Message Desperately Needed. My paternal grandmother died of Alzheimer's several years ago, when I was around 18 years old. I had a hard time dealing with her mental decline, because at the same time my bipolar and ADHD symptoms were greatly worsening, and I was unable to get treatment that helped. I would just be uncomfortable around her when we went to visit her in the memory care facility, which made me feel guilty. The last time I saw her conscious and awake, I didn't get to hug her because she had snapped at us and went on a nonsensical tirade about her dog being taken from her and was escorted away by hospital staff. I felt horrible about it because I wanted her to remember me in a positive way, in her last moments, if she remembered me at all. She loved me and my brother so much when she was able to. I got a job at a pizza place a year after that, and when I was still sort of new at my job, we got a carry-out order for a customer who was in the early stages of dementia. She had asked me to carry her pizza out to her car because she sometimes has trouble remembering what she's doing, but we had more orders after her, so I forgot to take it out to her and just placed it on the warmer and waited for her to come inside. She came into the store to check on her order, and I realized what she had asked me to do and apologized to her. She shook her head, looked me straight in the eyes and said, very seriously, with a familiar tone, "It wasn't your fault. I forgive you." It felt like it was intended to refer to a much larger mistake than just leaving someone's pizza in a warmer for 10 minutes, and the look on her face was exactly the one my grandma had when she was comforting me as a kid. I immediately started crying and told her she reminded me of someone I had lost, and she winked and told me everything was okay before leaving with her food. After that, I never saw her again, even after working there every single week for more than 2 years. Every time I think of that incident, I laugh at the fact that I believe a messenger angel ordered a pizza from me just to send me the message I desperately needed to hear. Case file number 454, written by Mama Sinika. Secrets of an old lady vanishing in a flash. I, 40 female, went to the supermarket with my husband, 43 male, and my son, 7 male, last week. As usual, he stayed in the car with our son while I went in. They usually park at the parent and child parking spot, right by the main entrance. However, because it was cold and raining, he left me right by the door before parking. 15 minutes or so later, I come out and spot our car right in front of me. I walk by the back window where I see my kid's car seat, but nobody in it. And then as I walk to the front, I see an old lady sitting in the front passenger seat alone. She was gazing towards the front of the car, and I thought, gosh, I almost opened the door to the wrong car. Lucky she's not looking this way, or I could have scared her by trying to get in. So I kept on walking for a couple of meters. It's a small parking lot, and couldn't see our car, so I called my husband. He answers the phone, and I asked him where he's parked, and he says, right in front of the store, parent and child parking spot. I turn around and there he is, in the same car, and our child is strapped in his seat. Neither of them saw me or the lady that I saw in the car. I'm still doing mental gymnastics to explain it to myself, unsuccessfully. Case notes, file number 454. So it was the same car, the same make and model, and even had your son's car seat in the back. One would presume it would be reused in the future if you had a second or third son. So I'm wondering if this is more than a parallel universe sightseeing trip, like we so frequently get. Instead, I suspect you somehow glimpsed your future, or rather one possible future. Just by seeing it, you've changed the series of dominoes that would fall to it. I don't know if you wanted to have more kids, but this would prove it possible. Another thing, your husband or son didn't see you approach the car and look inside. That means that you were physically in the future, not just glimpsing it for those few seconds. Otherwise, your family would have seen you looking into the car with a bewildered expression, no doubt. It's worth noting too, future time travel is indeed possible, and we do it all the time at extremely minor levels, nanoseconds, because of gravitational and acceleration frames of reference. But to suddenly jump forward and back, so far, no idea how that could happen physically. Case file number 455, written by Saya Lux. The secrets of a girl I knew and then forgot about in mid-conversation. I have had some really weird things happen to me throughout my life. The only person who knows them all is my husband, but I have always wanted to reach out and see what others think of my experiences and if anyone else has had similar experiences. This took place when I was a teenager. I believe somewhere between 16 or 17. My dad was a truck driver, and I went with him for a couple weeks in summer. We were in Texas, I believe it was Fort Worth, but I'm not positive. We pulled into a truck stop and got out together to head into the store for something. On our way in, I saw a girl that I instantly recognized. She recognized me as well, and we basically ran into each other. We started enthusiastically catching up like old friends. I remember just being so excited to see her again and asking her how she had been doing. My dad and her dad seemed puzzled when they reached us. Our dads did the whole small talk thing about being truckers, and I really didn't pay attention to what they were saying. After a few minutes, they turned to us and asked us how we knew each other. We both just paused and realized we weren't sure. My dad asked her name, and I realized I had no idea what her name was. She didn't know mine either. Her dad seemed pretty freaked out by this point, but nothing really rattled my dad much. My dad went on to explain that it was my first time ever being out of Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised. Turns out, she had never been out of Texas. We were strangers. Then it was like the moment I realized we hadn't met before. I also suddenly couldn't even remember what we had just been catching up about. I remember asking her how she was doing, but nothing of her response. It was like the conversation disappeared from my memory, fading with the seconds, but I was so sure we had a detailed discussion about our lives just moments before. It became awkward after that, and we parted ways. My dad told me later that he had seen plenty of strange things being a truck driver his whole adult life, and I shouldn't let it bother me. But I still think about her and wonder what happened. I was so sure I knew her, so sure we had been very close, and she was too. But I have no memory of her, and I know I never saw her before or after that. Case file number 456, written by Spectacular. Secrets of a newspaper stand, brought back to life in an instant. Once a week, for the past 2 years, I've walked to and from a supermarket. On the way, I walked down a long road which has houses on one side and a whole lot of nothing on the other, except for the remains of a little store that sold newspapers and daily essentials. For the past 2 years, I've passed these remains and recalled the time. Around 6 years ago, my friend and I were passing the store, but had to take shelter when the heavens suddenly opened and a heavy storm started. It made me feel a little melancholic to look at the remains, thinking of happier times and so on. What used to be a store that happily served its local community was now barely 3 partially knocked down walls and a pile of rubble. Last week it was 3 walls and a pile of rubble. Today, to my utter astonishment, it's the same store it was 6 years ago. I couldn't really say what it looked like in between then and the past 2 years, as I only moved back to the area 2 years ago. Kind of run down and old looking, but certainly not a pile of rubble. I can't be sure, but I believe it's the same 2 old men running it, who called my friend a cab and I that day as we were caught in a storm. This is my first experience since childhood that I describe as supernatural. Bonus file, written by Nut Bastard. Secrets of Good Boy Charlie, saying goodbye one more time. Had a dog growing up. His name was Charlie. Charlie was a mutt pit and German shepherd mix, and some other stuff too. He was very willful and prone to occasional violence with the other dog, Sam. But for the most part, he was a good dog, even though he ate the arm off my dad's recliner chair and just claimed it as his own. This dog chewed everything: shoes, couches, sticks, and rocks. He also loved to get out of the yard, and it was a poorly fenced 1-acre woodland lot. But because of his aggression problems and his wanderlust, he wore a pretty heavy chain around his neck with a bell and reflectors attached. Anyway, because he chewed everything, my mother bought a supposedly unchewable plastic bone thing for him. First of all, screw whatever company made that thing, because Charlie had no problem chewing through it and swallowing pieces of it too. A piece he swallowed ended up rupturing his intestine, and surgery would have been $6,000 at a predicted success rate of only 20%. We didn't have that kind of money. Mom took him in and had to put him down. Dad buried him in the yard. 10 days later or so, it was me, my brother, and my dad, all up late, just talking, not much going on. Then we all heard it, and we all looked at each other. It was unmistakable. All at once, we heard the click-clack of Charlie's claws on the deck, and the jingling of his chain, and the tiny little jingle bell. It sounded 100% like Charlie was asking to come in. Dad got up, went to the door, and opened it. Nothing was there on the porch, but Dad just stood there with the door fully open for a good 10 seconds, standing off to the side as one would when letting a dog inside. He saw that we were confused and said, "Just want to make sure Charlie got all the way back in." And that was the end of it. Never heard from him again. The only other thing of note here is that my dad did not like dogs or cats until we got Charlie, and Charlie promptly ate his very expensive chair. In some weird way, my dad respected that. Don't ask me why, because I'd need to ask him, and sadly, that's not possible. 3 people, myself included, all heard it at once and knew immediately what the sounds were. The closest neighboring house was half a mile away, and our driveway was steep and long, so any noise was cause for alert. It was a very quiet place. Case notes, bonus file. Oh man. Reading this was tough. I've had a few dogs in my life. When they pass, it's almost unbearable. Nothing short of losing a family member can compare. But even then, it's a different type of pain. It's a heavy sorrow, a loss that you can't wish away. Time does help, but still, you remember them. Charlie came back just one more time, maybe just to let his old family know he's doing okay. I wonder if they have doggy treats in heaven. They must, right?